2017. Okay.
I'll call the workshop to order. Please note that in accordance with the town's procedure bylaw, no decisions are to be made, but rather this meeting is an opportunity for council to have an informal discussion with regards to the various items. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest with respect to the items that are on our agenda? There being none, then we'll go forward. Madam Commissioner, if you could
Good morning,
provide an
Mr.
introduction.
Mayor. Thank you very much. Now, we've just had a slight change in our schedule this morning. The clerk, Andrew, was going to provide a PowerPoint presentation. He will be doing that shortly. He's just been waylaid and should be here in any moment. In any event, we also have this morning Stephen O'Brien, who is the city clerk from the city of Guelph. And just a backstory, and Stephen has agreed to let me share this with you. Stephen was an intern, and as you know, we've had a number of interns ourselves. I think we've had 3 or 4. Stephen was an intern originally. Was it Richmond Hill you were in? No, I was in Northern Bruce Peninsula. So Northern Bruce Peninsula, and then went to the town of Richmond Hill, and is now the city clerk at Guelph. So we truly appreciate that he's taken the time this morning just to share Guelph's story about internet voting. So I'll turn it over to Stephen.
Thank you, Anita. Mr. Mayor, thank you for having me. Members of council, pleasure to be here. I would like to take a time just to share a little bit of the story that Guelph went through with respect to internet voting. Happy to answer any questions that you may have. And perhaps what I'll do is I'll kick it off with just a little bit of an outline of what I'd like to go over. I'll tell you a little bit about Guelph. I think it's relevant and important to compare a little bit about with respect to Guelph and Newmarket. I want to tell you a little bit about our internet voting journey, the election model that we used in 2014. I'd like to outline a couple of surveys that we conducted, talk about our results. I think costs are important for any council in making determinations on going this route. And then I think perhaps most importantly, and where I suspect there will be a lot of questions, is some of the concerns or questions that we had from our members of council, as well as our community members, vis-a-vis internet voting. So again, I'm happy to answer those as we get through those portions of the presentation. So Guelph's 122,000 people. We're west end of the GTA, sandwiched between what is really Wellington County. We're sandwiched in Wellington County. We're a single-tier separated city. We have 6 wards in the city of Guelph. There's 2 members of council per ward, so we have a 13-member council, which includes our mayor, Mayor Guthrie. Not a very large physical community. We have the luxury of being not spread out, which quite frankly sort of was a comparator that when I looked at Newmarket and Guelph was fairly similar. There's not a huge geographical area that Guelph takes up. And again, in looking at those comparisons, you can see on the screen similar size in a lot of regards. I would say we're sort of that medium-sized city in Ontario. And there have certainly been a lot of municipalities of similar scope and size that have entered into the internet voting realm and have been successful in that regard. So our internet voting journey. In 1994, the election, we had a central, that's the sort of first time we automated an election. We had central count tabulators, so one central tabulating machine. All of the ballots came in from the various locations to that central tabulator, and we tabulated results in that regard. We moved to poll-based tabulators in 2006. And from that point, we saw the push of internet voting across Ontario. I think it was 2003 that your neighbors to the south, Markham, embarked on that journey. Certainly your clerk, Andrew, is seen as someone who innovated in that regard while working at Markham. And they really carried the torch. So internet voting kind of started in York Region, which is quite interesting for you. We started investigating the potential of that through 2010, but really got on board leading up to 2014. We conducted a community survey, which I'll cover off in 2013. Our report to council and committee went in that same month. And in July the following month, our council approved the implementation of internet voting. And obviously, last October, we implemented internet voting, and we ran internet voting during our advance period for a total of 17 consecutive days. So with respect to our model, it was dual channel, paper and internet voting. We had paper during both advanced voting and on election day, a total of 5 days of voting, advanced voting in terms of the usage of traditional paper ballots. And then during the advanced voting period, again, as I alluded to earlier, we had 17 days in total. We also implemented something called electronic voter strike-off, which was very helpful for our staff. All our voters lists were contained in a central location, an electronic location. We struck off electors electronically using laptops and barcode scanners at the polling locations. We heard through the surveys, which I'll get to, that some of our residents and our electors were really keen on having flexibility in voting. So we offered vote anywhere during the city in the advanced stages. That was 3 locations throughout the city, one in the north end, one in the central area, and one in the south end. And then we sort of scoped down that vote anywhere notion during on election day, where anybody could vote within the ward at any of the locations within that ward. Our aim was to make this election easy for electors, make it easy for them to get to polls. If they wanted to, they could vote online in advance, but the idea was to make voting easy. With respect to the survey, you can see there that we had about 56% of respondents said that they would totally agree with using internet voting as an option if it were available. This survey was conducted. 600 Guelph residents aged 18 years and older obviously were interviewed. I have stats on margin of error if you're interested, but that was the key question for us. We had a good portion of the population saying to us that they would be interested in internet voting, and that was important for us. Among the respondents with an opinion, online and telephone voting was named as a way to increase the number of voters. We asked a series of questions, which you can see there, but a good chunk of folks responded to say that online and telephone voting would also be an avenue through which we could see potentially, in their opinion, an increase in voter turnout. In addition, when we outlined options between phone and internet voting, we had a vast majority of individuals, 63%, said that they would be totally likely to vote online and vote remotely. You can see the stats there and the differentiations between phone voting. Just to clarify, we didn't have any phone voting options. It was strictly internet voting. In addition, we asked residents to rate their level of agreement with each statement. We asked what would be most important and what would help individuals and with respect to their voting. And you can see there from that survey, we had 65% that said that internet voting would likely help them in casting a ballot. Sorry, 62%. The 65% was again related to the flexibility of being able to vote anywhere. So both those metrics were key indicators for us when we went into and planning the election and speaking to our residents about the ability to vote anywhere within the city on advanced polls, the ability to vote anywhere within your ward on election day, and the availability of internet voting. And this is sort of what I think is sort of the crux of the decision point. We asked quite clearly citizens what their preferred method of voting was, traditional versus alternative. And we had more folks tell us that remote internet voting would have been their preference. You can see that paper ballot is not that far behind. There are still those that definitely want to use that avenue, hence the reason why we opted for that dual channel method. There are communities that we saw in 2014 that went solely electronic voting. I know of Ajax as being one of those, but we still felt it was beneficial as sort of a graduation and a transition year for us to implement internet voting alongside paper ballot voting. I wanted to share some statistics about numbers in terms of how many folks actually did cast a ballot. We offered a total of 432 hours consecutively of online voting. Again, that was from the 17th of October to the 24th of October. It ended the Friday before Election Day, Monday. and you can see that number increase. We got a lot of interest near the tail end of that period. My guess would be that people were made aware that neighbors and friends and family had voted online, so there was a word of mouth, so to speak, that shared that interest. We had a significant amount of individuals vote online on that last day, and it culminated in just shy of 13,000 ballots cast online. You can see the times, what I wanted to highlight here was just that internet voting allows flexibility for people to choose when they vote. There were 17 people that cast a ballot between 2 and 3 a.m., which I thought was kind of interesting. But you can see those peaks and valleys of where people most voted. I think it's pretty fair to say where the most popular ones is after dinner, maybe after the kids go down and that type of thing. So again, it allows flexibility, and you can see in the window there that it allows flexibility when, generally speaking, physical polls would be closed. So that was my intent to highlight that. Following the election, we wanted to wrap up that similar survey that we did in advance of the election and offer some information and metrics following the election. We had 84% of those who voted online expressed that they were confident in the security surrounding the voting process, and 64% of those said that they were very confident. I think the numbers are helpful, but perhaps anecdotally it's a little bit more beneficial. We ran a kind of an open session in council where people could come and demo. We'd give out fake pins and they could vote online in sort of like a mock internet election to kind of educate the community, educate members of council about how easy the process would be. And at the end of that session, I had an individual come to me and say, it was challenging enough in terms of accessing the system that she felt it was secure and that her security was being thought of through the process, but easy enough that it wasn't too onerous to get to the point of casting a ballot. And it was stories like that really helped. We had stories of people casting ballots from China, someone who was working overseas for a period of time, and they were able to vote online. You hear the story of the snowbirds that fly south in the winter or that time of year, and we certainly have those stories as well. So again, flexibility was key for us. 58% of voters mentioned that they would continue to vote online or would vote for the first time online in 2018 if it was offered. And 54% found the 2014 municipal election easier, more accessible, and convenient in comparison to 2010. All were important measures for us. In terms of costs, we spent, this is the portion that you see on the screen there is a portion of the contract. We had the same vendor for both our paper internet voting process, so the paper ballots that we would put through the tabulating system, as well as the internet voting system. So it was one vendor, one contract, but the portion of the contract that was related to internet voting was the amount that you see there, about $62,000. I will admit that there is the ability to go different vendors, and that's not at all uncommon in Ontario municipalities. We're told that there's an economy of scale, so to speak, when there's one vendor doing it. I don't, from my own personal experience, I can't be certain of that, but that's about the amount that was of our contract that was devoted to the internet voting component. Rolled into the same contract would have been all the things that you would anticipate, all the consumables that we use for the paper voting process, the results reporting system, all of the accessible voting equipment that was included for the in-person paper voting, and then support on site and on election day from the vendor to assist if there were any issues. So I'm going to take a little bit more time to sort of go through this piece, and I understand that as it relates to security, you will have some information from your IT staff. But you know, your denial of service attacks, your Trojans, the viruses, the spoofing, those are all identified as potential threats to any internet voting process. What's important is that the procedures that clerks put in place and that the system has in place mitigate those risks. And we do that by again, controlled access and that type of thing. How we addressed it further was obviously the firewalling, the user authentication, failover, redundancies, all those types of things are in place. We used a two-step PIN process. So we mailed out a voter notification. That voter notification had a voter ID on it that was unique to the elector, and we required them to log in with that ID. verify that they were who they were through another identifying mechanism that we had through the voters list. In our case, it was date of birth. And then we subsequently issued a PIN. And then they would, with those two pieces of information, the ID and the PIN, they could then go log online and cast a ballot. Some systems allow you to log in with simply the information that's provided on a voter notification card. So for us, that was part of the security, part of the way to address that issue. The same principles and technologies that are used in securing internet banking transactions and the securing of medical records, that's the same type of security systems that are in place. And again, I'll defer to your IT folks for the nuances on that. The third thing that I wanted to highlight, we worked with a group of municipalities that use the same internet voting vendor as we were using. You can see the names there. And we secured, all of us through a sort of piggyback RFP process, a third-party group, a group called Digital Boundary Group, to conduct a security audit of the system. So in advance of the election, we worked with our vendor and this third-party group to set up an arrangement in a test environment where that group could effectively attack the system, for lack of a better word. That came back with an audit report that the Digital Boundary Group prepared for us. It identified a few areas of weakness, and our vendor certainly corrected those. But we also made that available publicly so that those who were concerned could be made aware that we've tested the system, we've put it through the ringer, so to speak, and came out confident with what the vendor was able to deliver. The other piece that I want to address is coercion. In theory, the idea of unsupervised voting, or internet voting in this case, certainly enhances the accessibility of the election, makes it easier for electors to get to the process, get to the voting process, exercise their right. But the reality is, the criticism is that there is an expense in regards to oversight, verification, voter identification, watching and observing behaviors and that type of thing. What's important to realize is that impersonation, coercion, fraud, those are all possible in any voting scenario, but they are mitigated through the design of the system that you put in place. And I'll speak to some of the ways that we address that. But whether you go unsupervised or supervised voting, those concerns will always be present. That's the nature of the beast, unfortunately. So what we did to mitigate these concerns, we sent individual voter notification cards. So we didn't send one combined mailing to each house, whereby an elector would open up a package and effectively have all 4 cards for all 4 members in the house. We sent one envelope per elector. So if there were 5 electors in a house, there were 5 separate envelopes that arrived. That doesn't sound like much, but the reality is it's an extra layer, right? We're talking about people opening other people's mail in that case, which is another step in the wrong direction for that individual who's wanting to go that route. Again, I talked about the 2-step verification for registering online with date of birth. We had the ability to cancel or reissue PINs, to flag voter IDs. We spent time educating electors on the process and what to expect, so that they could be aware of those envelopes when they came through. And really, we worked with our vendor very closely to monitor. You can monitor certain IP addresses if there's multiple activity or increased activity on those addresses, and address accordingly through again, whatever procedures you put in place. And I think what's most important is from a strictly legislative standpoint. Section 89 of Ontario's Municipal Elections Act places the responsibility with the voter to ensure that they are entitled to vote and that they don't vote more times than they're allowed. In essence, the Act puts the onus on the voter. And that was important for us, and that was part of our education campaign that we discussed that clause. Addressing other concerns, there were a lot of questions from us about the role of the candidate, the role of scrutineers, the changing way that internet voting impacts the system. The candidate role remains similar. There's more emphasis, I think, for the candidates to educate electors. We really spent the time with our members of our sitting members of council at the time, and all candidates leading up to the election, and talked to them about the ways that they could help us get the message out. Talk to them about the ways that they could share. We walked them through the same session, the same public session. We asked that as many candidates as wanted to could come to that, and we asked them to sit with us try and vote using the mock system that we set up. So that was important for us. Obviously, the role of the scrutineer changes. There's no ability to physically observe the voting taking place. So how we addressed it again, we had that candidate information session that we focused on the usual suspects, filing your financial statements and that type of thing, but a significant portion of that was on online voting. And the idea there was, again, to help us have the candidates act as partners with us, which we really thought was important. We provided, upon request for candidates, weekly voting stats, so online voting, so that there was an ability to see those statistics as they were happening, so that candidates could be aware that it was happening and it was ongoing. And we invited scrutineers to be present during the final tabulation, and that included the uploading of our internet voting file. So it changes. It is different for scrutineers, but there are ways for candidates to be comfortable and confident in the process as well. And with that, I will take any question that folks have. I wanted to make sure to sort of plant the seed and allow you some time to think of some questions, and happy to answer those if
Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate, first of all, that you did take the time to come all the way in from Guelph. Obviously, you didn't get caught in the same traffic that Andrew did. But I'm wondering if you still have still some time to be here, if we could go through Andrew's presentation, and then we could have the two of you answer questions concurrently, if that would work for you. Do you have time for that?
Absolutely, certainly.
Okay, great. Thank you. Then I'll ask Andrew to come forward, go through the presentation, and we can have our questions following that. Okay?
Good.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Thank you for your patience. I was caught in traffic, so our order was switched around a little bit. So that being said, that's good. I'm going to cover off what we learned about the online voting experiences from the 2014 election, and I'm going to outline two options that we are thinking of, staff are thinking of for 2018. And then you've heard Stephen's presentation, and then from that we'll take some questions and get some feedback that will help to drive our future Committee of the Whole report on internet voting. So in terms of the background, staff were asked to explore in the previous term internet voting for use on October 27th, 2014. And leading up to that, we held a council workshop, much like we are today. We had a public information center, and we had a telephone survey, which was a representative survey of about 805 participants. And in that phone survey, we saw 48% preference for internet voting, 41% preference for paper ballot voting, so it's sort of similar to the Guelph survey, and the balance of those respondents were undecided or had no response. We also did an online survey, not representative, but still provided people the option for feedback, of about 100 participants, and in that we had about 81% preference, which isn't surprising because it was offered online. Staff did recommend the use of internet voting for the 2014 election, together with internet voting terminals and voting places. And the only reason why we suggested that model is because of budget limitations at the time. So essentially we offered the internet voting platform, and we were going to use laptops to allow the same platform in a voting place where people might need assistance or who may not have access to the internet or who might require support of some type. So that's the reason why we recommended that model in 2014. In January 2014, I think mostly because of the time frame leading up to the election, the decision was to refer consideration of internet voting to 2018. And in the 2014 election, tabulators were used with paper ballots, so very much the same model that has been used for a number of years in Newmarket. So for the current term, in March of this year, staff was asked to report back on internet voting within 6 months, which is what we're trying to get to today. And council is required to approve voting method by June 1st, 2018, subject to any amendments in the Municipal Elections Act, which I should mention is currently under review through the province, just the same as the Municipal Act. So there is a legislative review going on. I guess reflecting on the 2014 election from our administrative perspective, I was very pleased with the process and proud of the staff team supporting me. We made a number of improvements, including a vote anywhere advance vote, much like Guelph did. We offered advance voting over Thanksgiving weekend and a voting location at the farmers market, which was very popular. We offered a helpful elections information app. We had regular candidate email newsletters and reference materials, such as a postcard to help candidate teams outline the sign bylaw regulations. We also made accessibility a priority and adopted an accessible elections plan, and we worked closely with our Accessibility Advisory Committee. And we also strengthened our election training by producing a training video and hands-on role-playing. So we had some good successes, even if we didn't proceed necessarily with the internet voting. So the first option that we're suggesting Council may wish to consider is the same method as used in 2014 in previous elections, and that is the use of vote tabulators during advance voting and on voting day. And here it's suggesting 7 days of advance voting, but of course it could be longer. That's a decision point later in the process. And of course we would have special voting opportunities for those that live in seniors' homes, long-term care facilities, and hospitals. And in terms of the cost, is around $310,000, which is relatively similar to the 2014. Just the cost of things will go up by that point. Option 2 is what we're thinking as well as an option, and that is the use of vote tabulators during advance voting and on voting day. And the use of internet voting during the advance voting period only, or during advance voting period and including up to and including voting day. I think likely our recommended approach here would be the use of internet voting during advance voting and on voting day to maximize participation. Logistically and practically, there's no reason not to offer it up to and including voting day, as I'm sure Mr. O'Brien would confirm, but some clerks approach this if they're concerned about their own bandwidth or in supporting a new voting method, or perhaps to test the community's uptake with internet voting. Option 2 also offers the advance voting 7 days, or as confirmed by council, along with the special voting opportunities in homes and long-term care facilities and hospitals. And option 2 adds about $90,000, and that includes the cost of the online voting platform, which alone is about $50,000 for our population. That's the 75 cents per elector. That's roughly the average of many of the providers out there, as well as the additional and necessary education and outreach costs, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So but the cost of providing internet voting during the advance voting period only, or during advance voting and up to and including voting day, is the same. So you pay by eligible elector. It doesn't really matter how long you offer that. So we're trying to, essentially our recommendation is to make the most of what we have available. So option 2 supports the principles and the requirements of the Act. It is intended to enhance convenience to voters by providing another voting method option. It allows for accessibility and independence for persons with disabilities in particular. It does reflect our demographics, and it helps to support our busy lifestyles. It also supports the town's objectives on being a virtually engaged community and our electronic service delivery. And it also continues to provide that paper ballot option. We know from the telephone survey anyway, 41% still prefer that method, at least at that time in 2014. So it is providing choice for voters. This slide just shows some planning assumptions. So based on a conservative turnout of 40%, which would be about 26,000 electors, we're thinking around 30% would vote online and 70% in person. That could actually be more if we promote it through education and communications. And it also, this model allows us to continue to ensure the in-person voting is efficient and well supported. And I think it's very much similar to Guelph's actual numbers. So in Ontario, and I'm sorry I missed the first portion where Stephen may have covered this, but Ontario, 2.4 million electors had the opportunity to cast their ballot online in binding elections, and it's interesting because that's about a quarter of the provincial electorate. That's a huge number. It was in 2014 in Ontario the largest deployment of internet voting worldwide. So it's an interesting statistic. And they help to augment the perception of Ontario municipalities as being progressive digital innovators. One of the benefits municipalities have in assessing their voting method for 2018 is the work of the Internet Voting Project, which is a nonprofit government and university-sponsored research project at the Munk School of Global Affairs at the University of Toronto. And that's looking at the impacts of internet voting from among Canadian jurisdictions from a social science perspective. So there were 97 municipalities offering internet voting in 2014. 47 municipalities participated in the Internet Voting Project survey. And that included a survey and interviews with online voters, candidates, and election administrators. So I will quote some of those statistics from that. And you can learn more about that at internetvotingproject.com. And you certainly can ask me. I'd be happy to give you more detailed statistics that might be that I might highlight here. So just this slide just shows some of the comparable municipalities voting via internet in terms of size and significance. It's quite a broad range of municipalities across the province. So according to the Internet Voting Project, each election cycle, the number of municipalities in Ontario deploying internet elections has about doubled, and they expect that to be even more so in 2018. So I mentioned that convenience and accessibility are driving reasons for the rationale for adopting internet voting from a staff perspective. This figure demonstrates how voters view the convenience of online voting. So why would you vote online? And I see that my numbers have been chopped off, so I'll make sure I circulate that to council. But you can see the largest proportion of that graph is due to convenience. This is a slide from the town of Ajax, and they offered internet and telephone voting. They actually did offer internet voting in person, much like the model that was thought about in 2014 in Newmarket. But you can see here, you have about 812 voters. Unlikely that they would have arranged proxy votes and coordinated all the paperwork required to have someone vote in person if that internet voting platform wasn't offered to them. So you can see the broad range of places that people actually exercise their vote from. Most of them are internet. There are a few telephone voters there, but obviously for cost reasons, internet would be the way to go there. From Australia to the UK. So in terms of some of the demographics of internet voting generally, the average age of internet voters is 53. Online voters ranged from 18 to 99, and the majority of online voters were 45 years of age or older. So it sort of changes some of the perceptions about internet voting being just a platform for younger folks. And online voters who are 45 and up combined to form 74% of online ballots cast. Figure 29 challenges the perception internet voting caters to younger voters versus older voters. In fact, a larger percentage of voters between 18 to 24 voted by paper ballot, and a larger percentage of voters age 45 and up voted by internet in 2014. So regardless of the voting method, the larger proportion of voters continues to be those 45 and older. This is likely to be the fact that those that are 45 and older tend to be more settled, own their property, perhaps they have children and they participate in or have an interest in municipal programs and services. So it really reflects the same type of participation you'd have in person. So this slide shows participation rate of online voters among municipalities having introduced internet voting for the first time in 2014. So based on the municipalities above, the participation of the residents using internet voting on average was about 31%. The Internet Voting Project discovered that communities that have offered internet voting in more than one election typically see growth in voters' use of internet voting with each election cycle. This slide illustrates the percentage increase in voter turnout among Ontario municipalities having introduced internet voting for the first time in 2014. All of the municipalities above had paper ballot methods in 2010 and a relatively similar size to Newmarket with the exception of Quinte West. There appears to be a general trend of increased turnout, although it's quite minimum. Quantitative research on voter turnout is limited, but it's understood that turnout is more likely to be driven by the nature of the races, campaign platforms, factors such as ability to coordinate transportation, childcare, weather, etc. So you can see it's a marginal increase. I think, though, it does show the potential to motivate participation if another channel is offered. So according to the Internet Voting Project survey, paper ballot voters' greatest concern with internet voting was the possibility of security issues. This was about 37% of all concerns. It's interesting to note, too, that in the next largest point there is that 32% had no concerns expressed. Oops. Okay, I'm going to ask Sue Chase, our Director of IT Innovations, just to help provide a little bit more detail from Newmarket's perspective around security. You okay to do it from there? Okay. Yep.
Hi, thanks, Andrew. I think the concerns about security are very real. We can't downplay that at all. We all hear about internet fraud, hackers, and that every single day. So it's important, really, to address it. But we can help mitigate some of these risks. I think, as Stephen mentioned when describing his experience in Guelph, there's a lot of ways that we can address the issues. So this slide here is showing that there are multiple aspects to internet voting. And there are ways that we can protect the integrity of voting of the entire platform from threats like denial of service, Trojan horses, viruses, even spoofing of the websites. Some of the issues of most concern really are making sure that the person casting the vote is eligible to do so, that they're actually the right person doing the vote, protecting the privacy of that voter, protecting the availability of the system overall, and the integrity of the counting process itself. So security considerations have been identified, and there are protection measures for the various levels that we have here, from the hosting environment, the website, the web process itself, the voting process, and right down to the voter's device. Okay. So in terms of authentication, Internet Voting Platform provides typically two different approaches to authenticating the voter, and Stephen mentioned this briefly earlier. There's a one-step process and a two-step process. So in the one-step process, an individual receives a notification card addressed to them. So it's very similar to the voter notification cards that we see now, and it contains a PIN, or identification number. The voter uses this PIN along with some other credential, like their birth date, to enable them to access their vote online. The one-step process has been used by a lot of the municipalities. It has the benefit of being simple, but more municipalities tend to go with a more secure method, the two-step authentication process. So in the two-step process, an individually addressed notification package, again, is sent to the voter by mail and contains that PIN again. The voter then uses this PIN with their credential again, like their birth date, and they have to go online, create their own password, And typically, we try to make that a more secure password. And then that registers their intent to vote online only. So if that registration is successful, the voter is then sent another package by mail or by encrypted email containing a second PIN. The voter uses this second PIN together with the password that they created themselves when registering to vote online. We often see other methods added to this, like the CAPTCHA challenges, you know, when you go online and you get that scrambled little word that proves that you're human. So there is that, and that helps some of the protect some of the spoofing. Should the voter lose their PIN or forget their password, or the mail is not actually delivered, there are protocols in place with the municipality to verify the identity of the voter, and their PINs or passwords can be then canceled. So it's similar to the current paper process. The municipality, the election officials always have ways of monitoring the process. Live electronic voter lists are used to allow for in-person online voting to occur concurrently, so we keep those lists up to date all the time and ensure a voter doesn't try to cast their ballot online and in person. So this two-step process also helps to identify the privacy of the voter themselves. There are other ways of protecting the vote. We see public key cryptography, or PKC as it's often referred to, because of course in IT we love our acronyms. But it's the primary tool used to protect the privacy of the vote. So as the voter makes their vote and they hit enter, the system then encrypts the ballot with a mathematical algorithm. And then the server that receives that ballot is then decrypted with another mathematical algorithm in order to be received. And this is often a two-step process, so that means there's two different decryption keys at the host site. And oftentimes we'll see different people have access only to one or the other key. So that protects that overall process quite a bit. There's denial of service or overloading the system. We see that. Hackers will often do that, and we've seen that happen previously in online voting systems. So that really messes up the availability of the system. You try to go online and you're denied access to it. So what we see the most common solution to that is a hosted solution. So that means we do not host it here on our town hall servers. It's a third-party vendor who would host it for us. Their locations, their physical location is secure, it's kept private, and they have multiple ways of protecting the availability and the location of those servers. So it makes it even harder. So the Newmarket voters, for example, don't know exactly where their vote is going. And that's overall the internet as well, so we can make those kind of protections. There's other protection measures available, and these really do depend on the solution that we select. And again, as Stephen mentioned, we do rely on governance, such as the Elections Act, for people to really act legally, and there are measures beyond the Elections Act for that sort of thing. And I think also security concerns really can be more about perception than reality. I mean, when online banking first started, most people were resistant. We didn't trust it. But now the majority of people actually do use online banking, and we're okay with it. We've gained some confidence through education, through marketing, and through proof that it actually does work. If we decide to move forward with internet voting, I think we'll first have to be confident ourselves, and we're going to have to gain that confidence. And that's through ways like these guys mentioned, the having Digital Boundary coming in and doing a security audit for us. That's a way of proving that confidence. And then we have to educate our residents and everyone involved in the entire voting process. And Andrew's going to talk a little bit more about that.
Yep. Thank you, Sue. I will touch first, though, on some of the illegal corrupt practices outlined in legislation, such as coercion, impersonation, stealing, or tampering with voter information letters or other voting materials, and vote buying. So, as it's been said before, internet voting is not a supervised voting environment, and that takes away some of the control by the election administrator. So in my view, the convenience and access to internet voting that it provides, it must be balanced against mitigating potential risks. Reasonable measures must be taken to mitigate risks within an acceptable risk tolerance level. And often the discussion around whether we pursue internet voting is stopped because it kind of find it very difficult to understand what that acceptable risk tolerance level is. But I believe there's effective means to mitigate risk within the same risk tolerance level as paper ballot voting. So I think that's how I would like to sort of share my perspective on it. All Canadian municipalities offering internet voting have had binding results. There has been no evidence to suggest corrupt practices by voters or candidates increased or is even a substantive concern with internet voting. It's been suggested that the unsupervised nature of internet voting supports the potential for voter coercion, and ultimately there's no procedural safeguard to avoid this in terms of the interaction between the voter and the voting platform, similar to any type of remote service provided by the town, such as payment of online taxes. But Option 2 does provide an in-person option, and my office would ensure there's an education program in place around the issues and work with the police as required to ensure enforcement is pursued if there was any evidence of coercion. To the best of my knowledge, there's been no charges laid with respect to coercion in a local election in Canada regarding internet voting, and that's probably an indicator on how widespread this particular concern is. Stealing or tampering with election materials such as voter information letters and using another person's identity to vote are both illegal. Although jurisdictions having introduced internet voting have not experienced such issues, warnings are typically included on the outside of the envelopes, and some jurisdictions, such as Markham, have included the requirement for online voters to acknowledge that they have read and understood a statement of voter responsibilities, corrupt practices, and penalties before they're gaining access to the online ballot. That's very much the same as you would have an online acknowledgement if you were purchasing a product or dealing with your bank in some way. So there's a simple analogy there. Procedures are put in place to ensure that undelivered voter information letters are returned to the municipal offices or picked up from post offices, and that those PINs are canceled. Where an individual contacts the municipality to indicate that they have misplaced, moved, or have not received their voter information letter, and records indicate that the letter has not been issued, PINs are canceled and new PINs are issued. If an individual steals another person's voter information letter, they would have to be required to know the individual's birth date or other unique personal identifier. However, in my experience, this type of occurrence is equally unlikely to other forms of mail theft. In my experience, it's more likely persons in the same household will have accidentally switched their voter information letters, passwords are forgotten, or that a voter experiences minor web browsing difficulties. So their intent isn't any kind of corrupt practice, rather just confusion on process or a misunderstanding. Procedures are developed to verify the identity of the individual and provide assistance through our customer service area to allow the individual to vote. So vote buying can occur regardless of the method of voting, and there's no procedural safeguards that a municipality can put in place to mitigate it, apart from education and working closely with the police. So it's been mentioned before, but a community education plan would assist voters and candidates to become aware of their duties, options to participate, and channels to identify questions and concerns related to corrupt practices. And while there's no evidence of potential corrupt practice having occurred, the police would be contacted. And as Stephen mentioned, the Municipal Elections Act identifies the voter as being responsible for ensuring they do not commit the corrupt practice, not the voting method chosen by council. So I'm assuming that's the same sort of approach, statutory framework, that the 97 municipalities that adopted internet voting have taken in pursuing it ultimately. So I mentioned an important driver for the internet voting option is its support of accessibility. Figure 24 here illustrates how internet voting is the preferred manner of voting where a voter is unable to vote in person. Pardon me. Internet voting has the capacity to support an independent and private voting option, which is unlike any other voting method, and takes away the barriers associated with requiring support and coordination of transportation to the voting place. So it's a real win for people with disabilities. In 2014, the Accessibility Advisory Committee did support internet voting, and of course, the website that is used to register to vote online and to ultimately vote is in accordance with our AODA standards. In the internet voting project, one of the key success factors of implementing internet voting was to ensure that there was a comprehensive education and support campaign in place, and that's certainly something we would look at if we were to pursue this option. And obviously, it could include a number of different aspects to it, but as Stephen mentioned, an important piece would be the ability to have a demo of the internet voting experience. We would be attending events. We would hold specific outreach for candidates, for different stakeholder groups, perhaps seniors. There's different ways and means, but we would have a comprehensive plan in place to ensure that. And of course, throughout the process, we would ensure that our customer service team here would be available and trained to ensure that they support the voters on the phone, online, or in person. So in terms of satisfaction, internet voters reported that they were extremely satisfied with the voting method. 95% of respondents were satisfied with the internet voting option, and it conveyed that it was due to the process being easy, simple, straightforward, convenient, and private. 98% said that they would vote again online, and 95% would recommend internet voting to other jurisdictions. 5% who replied that they were not satisfied communicated that it was due to frustrations with learning a new voting method. So of course, with option 2, the in-person method would still be available. So figure 2 demonstrates how satisfaction levels for internet voting are relatively positive for every age group. So that's the blue and the purple. Either very satisfied or fairly satisfied. And among candidates, 73% were satisfied with the security of the internet voting process, and at the end, you can see that in the second to last blue and purple bars. Just under 80% of candidates were completely or mostly in favor of having internet voting as an additional voting method. The majority of comments responded positively, saying that it allowed voters out of town to vote and that it made the beginning of the campaign more critical. The Internet Voting Project concluded that overall candidates were satisfied with the internet voting process, seeing more positive than negative effects on the electoral process. So that's, again, the Internet Voting Project of the 47 municipalities that participated. So in terms of next steps, Mr. Mayor, we're looking for some feedback on the options and the information presented today, and of course we'll come back to a future committee of the whole meeting with a report, and we'll have public input from that around that report.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. Very comprehensive, very informative from both presenters. I have some questions now. Regional Councillor Taylor.
Thanks. I have a number of questions, so I apologize in advance. But and I want to start by saying there's a ton of positive stuff in there. So my questions are around where I'm concerned. So they're not meant to be negative, but that's where I'm asking those sort of due diligence questions. Guelph saw a huge jump in voter turnout, but you had a new mayor elected over an incumbent and a lot of past provincial. So would you think that was that part of, obviously, like 10% is not to be maybe expected everywhere as a jump?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think that is probably pretty accurate. We did have a changeover in mayor and a very heavily contested mayoral race. There were a couple of key sort of big community issues that were driving that as well that I could sort of factor in. I think generally speaking, that's probably not to be expected, and I would say that council should not go into the process saying that we'll implement internet voting with the hopes that we'll see a 10% increase in voter turnout. I don't think that would be a fair calculation for anybody to make.
And to Andrew, am I not right though? The last time we saw a presentation on this a couple of years ago, there was actually some examples of decreases.
Yeah, that's true. What we have the benefit, of course, is now this internet voting project. So I have a little bit more of a broader, comprehensive statistics. Yes, there are municipalities, and Markham is an example, where I think in 2014 their overall turnout did decrease, and that would include the channel, the internet voting channel. In terms of why we're doing or why we're suggesting that council support this or the community, is probably less to do with driving turnout than it is about providing convenience and accessibility.
Thank you. So, and in Guelph, what was your education spend or your communications education spend? I think we're looking at roughly, by the sounds of it, 40 here, so.
I can get that number back in total. I can tell you the context of what that was. It was very significant. It was the online social media streams. It was the traditional media streams. We're fortunate to be a single tier where transit is all under one roof kind of thing. Not that you couldn't manage this with York Region Transit, but we had labels on buses and in bus shelters and all that type of thing. So we did have a fairly significant spend, although we were able to mitigate some of those costs, for example, on the transit side because of the in-house service provided.
Did any of your surveys get to the issue of why the number was much higher for people who said they would prefer internet voting compared to the number that did actually internet vote?
No, our post-election survey did not, and it's difficult to sort of ascertain those values. Ours did not, no.
It's interesting, right? I'm sure there's reasons. Maybe it's the one-step, two-step process, which is one of my next questions, whoever's got that. But,
yes. Actually, if I may, Mr. Mayor,
Yep, go ahead.
yes, I would say that does have an impact on
That's
ultimately
what I would have guessed.
because of course, the one-step process does allow you to vote immediately. Two-step requires you to register first and then
Wait,
have to go
yep.
back to vote. So, and it's one of those areas where ultimately we feel that it's more secure. So you might lose some people in that process. We'd have to go back and look to see what would be the actual numbers on it.
And that, my question around that is the one-step, two-step. That's based more around, am I correct that that's more around the security of potential individual voter fraud than large-scale system fraud?
Correct. Yes, the individual.
And so I think would have to look a fair bit in. I mean, if you're going to go into this new, it's nice to provide the two-step to say to people who are concerned about security, look how secure we're being. But if it's a barrier to people using it, and there's very little examples out there of individual voter fraud, that's a tougher decision than one-step, two-step to me anyways. I assume we'll look more at some of this as the process goes on.
Yes, we would need to do an audit we go through an RFP process for various vendors, and of course, security requirements would be set out, and they would be both from a technology but also from a user perspective. So we'd have to satisfy ourselves, and that it would be something I think that would be a clerk's decision in the end in terms of what would be the process.
Yeah.
It would be a procedural matter.
That'll be a tougher decision, but yeah. I've got a few questions. Sorry.
I wonder if we might come back to Jane and Kelly and then come back to your questions after that, John.
I imagine they don't care, but you can ask them if you want.
Just keep going. And
All right.
then
It's a workshop,
Yep.
right?
Yeah, it is. I'm just trying to get others as well. Go ahead.
Whatever you want. Would you like?
keep going.
All right. Advanced voting numbers. Do we see? It'd be interesting when you saw that chart with the numbers leading up. Was anybody compared, or the project compared traditional advanced voting numbers to having that broad internet vote? Do advanced voting numbers collectively go up under internet voting? It kind of feel like it does, but.
Yeah, so in our case, the internet, those numbers were just the online voting numbers during the advanced voting period. I could also provide, as a follow-up through Andrew, our numbers in the paper ballot voting side of things, if that would be helpful. But I think from a general standpoint, it's certainly, I use the term the buzz, the word of mouth. I think that does happen. I mean, people talk about it. There's the early adopters. We wanted a big window of internet voting in the advanced period to allow for that sort of groundswell to build. And so I think there is that sort of phenomenon that occurs.
I do know in the case of my experience from Markham that, and that's why I think from a Newmarket perspective, we're suggesting that we look to include it up to and including voting day, because you do build like the election in general, the date is important. A lot of people get engaged right in and around, very close to that date. So cutting off the internet voting at the end of the advanced voting period kind of gets people going, and then they think, oh, okay, I have to go to the polls now to do that. I really wanted to do my vote online. And I think that was something at Markham. They are looking at that for 2018.
And I think it's the other part of that is I think we'd be surprised how many people plan to go vote and then they get caught up at work and they just don't make it home in time. And so this would allow them to go, okay, I thought I was going to, but now I can quickly go online in the last 2 hours and vote. I wonder if there's a spike in some places there. But anybody have any information on why the larger Ontario cities are not going down this road?
I think part of it has to do with cost. The City of Toronto has looked at this, well, every election cycle they look at this. For them, the cost of deploying, I mean, it's just a massive exercise for them. Just the cost, really, and the logistics around it, having to support, for example, electronic voters list to allow the concurrent online and in-person voting, because of course, it's like the City of Toronto would offer both channels there. So I think cost has been one of their major concerns.
Yeah, and just to echo that, in my experience, or my discussions with some other municipalities, the clerk in Mississauga expressed the same type of concerns. It's just the cost piece. When you break out how much the internet voting component would cost, it's sometimes a bit more challenging to sell.
Yeah, although, of course, it is proportional. I mean, it's 75 cents a voter plus education. I mean, the education, but that's still per voter.
Yeah.
But, so two more areas now. The last one is the online banking. Last election, we were discussing this. I said this to everybody, as did Sue just now. I said, everybody, I mean, we online bank, for heaven's sakes. Like, you know, I sat down with somebody recently, by coincidence, who's very, very senior, in fact, is responsible for security at a major bank, online security. And he said, and he lives in town, he says, I would never support online voting. And I said, you're kidding. Like, I said, that's online banking. He goes, do you have any idea how many breaches we have? Do you know how much we have to budget to accommodate for that? Has anybody heard that dissenting argument and what the argument back to that is? Or
Well, I think in part, and Stephen can help with that, but when I was talking about acceptable risk tolerance level, that's really where the conversation goes, and that's, you know, when we're looking at 30% of people that are voting to begin with, it isn't, yeah, it's just, it doesn't have the same, you know, we certainly do our due diligence, and we put a security frameworks and protocols around it, but it offers, those processes are within an acceptable risk tolerance level. So that's the rationale we use. It isn't the same as you know, doing your banking online. It's a civic process that we're talking about here.
I'm not looking for negative feedback, but I want all the information for when it comes up with residents. And the other area I'm curious about is examples of, and if they're far and few between, great, but examples of election, online election fraud in Canada, United States, beyond Europe.
In the staff report that was included in the package, there were a couple examples that are there. Now, they're not truly a breach of the system. I think there were denial of service attacks and those types. So they didn't actually compromise the vote outcome. And I think an example would be, I think there was in the staff report was the party, the NDP party election. I think it was in BC, and in Washington there was a jelly bean election, I think, that they held that I referenced in there. But there are a few examples of where there were compromises to the system.
There's one in Europe or something, wasn't there?
But nothing that challenged the actual outcome of the election.
So could we get a little more, I mean, than the staff report, just information on that? Like how many there have been held, period? How many where there was compromise? How many actually compromised the election fully, or whether it was just an issue? Just, it'd be helpful, because I think that's what it really comes down to, is the security issue, I mean, largely. So making sure we understand that scope. The next question I had was on the cost now. So what would it cost, and I know it's not an option, but what would option 3 cost if it was internet voting only, or internet voting only and at the polls? Or does that reduce the cost considerably? Do you go back to the 310 more or less? Or?
Yeah, I mean, at the time that we were proposing yeah, we'd have to review that a little bit further.
Okay, and I'll leave it here. The reason I'm asking that is because I'd be interested in knowing that, not because I necessarily personally would want to pursue that this election. I like sort of where you're going, but if the goal were to go to that after an election, or even 2, but hopefully after 1 election,
right?
Is there a possibility of handling this from reserves, even, you know, or increasing a little bit for ongoing education, but handling some of it for reserves, and knowing that next election we'd be going back to a lower number? And the reason I say that is because for myself, a little bit of the hesitation, like the bigger cities, but it's all scale, is cost. I mean, it doesn't sound like much, but 90,000 operational dollars is a lot for us. We know, right? We go through the budget process. We grind to find dollars here and there. And if we knew there wasn't the ongoing impact, and that could be mitigated, because then I've got to start to say to myself, you know, 90,000 operational dollars, is this where the community wants it spent? I mean, because it's a limited resource, right? And that's the other, the security thing I could use a little more help with, and then is there options around
And I think the
how we
90
handle this in multi-budgets?
The election budget actually is all amortized over a 4-year period as well. So that's got to be one component of that. Yep. Okay, then Councillor Twining.
Thank you. Some of my questions have been answered, and it was good information. Thank you for bringing this forward. It's, you know, I mean, it's certainly, I think the bottom line is, for me, is, and it was last time, was security. I mean, that's what came up. People were kind of, that was the sort of pushback, was people didn't feel secure. So getting some more information, I think, would be helpful. For example, the examples of any situations in the past of other municipalities having, or other places in the world having any implications of security issues. I think that would be helpful so that we have that feedback to give back. But I think the bottom line, I think, is that, you know, I mean, it's a direction that lots of municipalities are going, and it's about accessibility, and, you know, I mean, it's just anything that's new is going to have some pushback. People, you know, just like online banking is exactly the same thing, right? People were very wary of it at first, and now are more comfortable with it. So I do support moving forward with it for next election, but I guess, and I do support the option of, you know, doing it, phasing it in and giving the people the option of a paper ballot, because there certainly is a large number of people that still do want to do that. The 90,000, I guess we're looking at the difference of 90,000 for the using the online system. Would that be, is there any of those costs that would be able to be used like next election in 4 years, or is that a total cost that would be 90,000 again, or is it like what is that for? Is that for like paying like the third party?
Of course, it's draft.
Right.
It's draft at this point.
Yeah.
The 50,000 of that 90 is the platform itself, and then the additional costs have to do with the communications and community outreach that.
Okay, so
it's
that
a
is part of,
range.
so the communications is part of that budget too?
Correct,
Of
yeah.
communicating,
Mhm.
okay. And that's up and above what we spend now
Mhm,
on
correct,
communications?
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, and it's theoretical. I don't really know at this
Right.
point what
What
you know,
exactly.
what that would entail or how comprehensive that would be.
that's sort
but
of just
it just allows us, for example, additional staff or additional you know, resources to be able to ensure that we have you know, residents understand the voting process and
Right.
their options.
yeah,
I was going to mention too that once we go through the, if we were to proceed with option 2 in the 2022 election, you know, depending upon how many people vote online versus in person, we can shift the arrangements with respect to the staffing and such for in-person voting.
right.
So there's always the option to kind of shift where we need to. And an election, of course, is a little unique in that it happens in the moment, and we need to be able to respond to it. So sometimes budgeting for elections is difficult.
Right.
So they're a bit sort of a theoretical budget that's there. It's being conservative as well, so it may not necessarily go up to the 90,000.
Okay, right. And I think we should, as well, if we're going to do it, then I think we should offer it on voting day too. I think that's important, because I think,
Yeah.
I mean, lots of people have that date in their head, and it's sort of a tradition, and like even myself, I got to vote on voting day, right? It's just like, it's just part of,
You're absolutely right.
Right, it's
That
part
date
of-
is, you know.
it's the way it is,
and-
right?
And it's just, people are busy, and then they
But
realize
peop-
it's happening, it's in the media,
Yeah.
and they want to vote.
Yeah,
so,
but they still would like to, you know, I mean, but they may want to use that option of doing it online, you know, just for the convenience or accessibility or whatever it may be. So offering it that day, I think, is important. And I do feel that, you know what, I think because security is so important to people, and that's where they have that sort of, they're wary about internet voting. I think having that two-step process is still important, even if it's not even if the one step is still going, it would serve the purpose fine and would not have any security issues, I think it's important that people have that feel that we are doing our due diligence, and I think having that two-step process is still important to have in place. So, thank you.
Just to clarify, Andrew, the 90,000 differential, you mentioned some of that is platform. Is the platform, that's not a throwaway cost, that platform could serve future elections, is that correct? Or
No, you
or would
pay,
need to
for
update
each election event, that's the per elector cost, around 75 cents per elector.
electorate? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. You finished, Jane?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Broom-Plumley?
Thank you, and thank you, Andrew and Stephen, for your presentation. Growing up in Newmarket, my father recently moved to Guelph 7 years ago, so there hasn't been a family dinner that has not gone by where we don't debate, what's Guelph doing better than Newmarket? Well, why aren't you doing this? So thank you for that, and you can certainly pass that along to your colleagues. My questions are around participation. In 2013, when you were gaining your information from the public, did you feel that you got a good response from the public? You got a good measurable amount of people giving you information in their opinion?
Certainly, as we were saying, certainly I think we did. You always want the responses to be, you know, much more than they are, but we had the surveys that went out, we felt that it was a representative amount. Again, I have the margin if that's of interest, but you know, that was important for us. The climate in Guelph was such that the city had come through, you know, the name Michael Sona and robocalls, and so there's a lot of scrutiny about electoral processes in general, and so I think that drove the interest in it. I think that sort of set a bit of a stage, and you know, people were interested in understanding more about it. So I was confident with the amount of responses that we received, and I think our council was, more importantly, most satisfied with that as well.
Good. And with regards to the 10% increase, would you say that was townwide, or was it more in the mayor's race itself?
It was overall increase in voter turnout. I think it would be hard to measure the specifics for each race, but I mean, I suppose we could do some digging and crunching to find that. But it was overall an overall increase in turnout.
And in terms of the online ballots, were you able to give a demographic of what the age of the online voters were?
Yeah, I didn't include that slide. We certainly have it. I can include it after the fact again if this council is interested in that. But it's very similar to what Andrew presented with respect to the internet voting project numbers. You know, the obvious piece, you think that it's the 18 to 24 demographic that will see a huge spike. That wasn't the case. It was
No.
that sort of 40 to 60 range, 65 range actually, that saw the biggest increase.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Carwin?
Yes, just a follow-up on Regional Councillor Taylor, through you, Mr. Mayor, to our IT manager, director?
Director of
Would you
Innovation.
see needed staff, an increase in staff for security reasons
Susan?
to prepare for this and during the election? You see, there are always hidden costs. We see the direct cost here, but it could be we need extra staff in communication, we need extra staff in IT. Do you see that, Susan?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, certainly from the IT perspective, no, not at all. For every election, most of the IT staff are all hands on deck just in case.
Okay.
Provide that background support. We see the exact same thing happening this time, just all hands on deck. But odds are it's going to be a hosted solution anyway. So the vendor will be providing that level of security there. We would expect to be involved up front so that we can gain the same level of confidence in their systems. And we would want to be involved in testing and that proof of concept. But during the actual election voting, we would be providing support to the clerk's department out at the poll stations if need be, if people needed just computer help, that sort of thing. So
Good.
No increase in our staff, no.
Thank you. Just a second question to you, Mr. Mayor, to either Stephen or Andrew, a reverse question. And I know, Andrew, you have experience in Markham, and Stephen, you had experience in Richmond Hill and other municipalities. We often look at, we have basically right across the province in municipal elections, basically about a 35% turnout. Mm-hmm. I think that's maybe a little bit higher, some lower, but it's consistent. 65% don't turn out. Has any statistics why people don't go out to vote? Has anyone compiled that? I mean, we've gone to internet voting. We want to increase the turnout. We had Project 50 here, and before that, Chris Emanuel was involved in a youth program to get more and more youth to come out, and we haven't succeeded. We've tried for decades now, and we've basically failed. The majority of people don't vote anymore.
Stephen, if you speak to your
In
experience,
municipal
and then
elections.
Andrew, yeah.
Is there anything, why, Stephen, or why, Andrew? I mean, here we're trying to build up this support, but I throw the question out in the reversal.
Through you, Mr. Mayor,
Stephen?
certainly I can attempt to answer it. I think it's the golden question, and I don't know if that's an answer that council will be looking for, but it certainly is the golden question. Incredibly difficult to ascertain why we don't have any specific Guelph-related statistics in that regard. To speak to some of your points, we had the mock election, we had candidate information sessions, we met with our youth advisory committees, our accessibility advisory committees, much of the same things that I have no doubt would happen here in Newmarket. We told young children at the youth council that they should be going home and talking to mom and dad about the importance of voting. You know, whether it's busy lives or you know, the trafficking and you know, commuting community we live in these days, it's difficult to pin down. Certainly from the Guelph perspective, I think maybe Andrew might be able to share something.
Andrew?
Yeah, I don't know if I have it. There isn't really an answer. I don't have anything. There's been no studies done that I'm aware of. But you know, I think there's, at least anecdotally, I know there's a connection with you know, whether or not you feel engaged, perhaps, or that those services and programs offered by the municipality relate to you. You know, you can see that certainly in the age aspect of participation. You know, if federal government elections have broader issues that are in the news more regularly, I mean, that could be a factor, for example, of why you might have greater turnout in other orders of government. So, yeah, it's a great question. I don't know if there's an answer to it other than that, you know, local government, yeah, you're right, it has been stuck around that 35% mark, and it probably needs more research and more thought.
Because we've tried, like, you know, we've had these, Chris Emanuel was in charge of this, and we had Gary Werders and his group. We wanted to get 50% out. Now we're trying internet voting, online voting, phone voting, whatever you do to try to get more people out. And basically that mark is still there.
Yeah.
It's about anywhere between 30 to 40%. The final question I have for you, through you, Mr. Mayor, to you, Steve, is Guelph is a university city.
Yes.
Do those university students vote in Guelph, or do they vote in where they sometimes, for instance, my son went to Guelph. He lived in residence in Guelph. Did he vote in Guelph? What happens to those students that are there? Like, he's there for, he rents well, they rented a room in a tenement house. Do those students vote?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, certainly they do vote, and we target that as an active voting group. We work with the university and the Students Association to broadcast messaging to the students. We did not have a voting location on site at the university because of the involvement of internet voting. We found that there was a good portion of students that, or the age group at least, that would have voted online were likely university students. So yes, they do vote. They actually have the ability to vote in both jurisdictions, believe it or not. They can vote at home and vote in the community they live in during the school year. So they're one of the few that have that.
Is that right? That's something I didn't know, that they can vote twice, once in Guelph and once in Newmarket.
They're voting once in each jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Okay, just another a moot question, my final question. With Guelph, it's a high percentage female to male. I think it was, my son was saying it's about 70%. Any description of whether male or female go out to vote? Just curiosity?
I don't know what the general, through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't know what the general population metrics would be. I understand that the university student male to female ratio may be in that range, but to be honest with you, I don't know if that's actually accurate through the rest of the community.
No, it's just the university.
Yeah.
It's just the university is about 70%, 30%.
I don't know. It would be difficult for me to ascertain and comment whether that was an actual factor in uptake or interest in internet voting or not.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Excellent presentation. And Andrew, thank you for all the work that you've done on this before the election of 2014 and afterwards.
Thank you. Councillor Bazance.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks to all three of you for your information presentation. I found that the report was probably one of the most comprehensive reports that I've seen so far on any particular issue. I guess we could get into the whole philosophical debate about why people do or don't vote, but it seems to me that what came out of your statistics and your surveys very clearly is the convenience factor is the driving motivator behind this. So while we may wish to see a higher voter turnout and more engagement of the public, I don't know that investing money in this particular technique or technology is going to serve that purpose. So that's perhaps one of the cost-benefit things that we would have to look at. But I was just interested in one of the beginning slides, Andrew, that you had, Mr. Mayor. You talked about the approval required by June 1st, 2018,
Yeah.
subject to any amendments. That only would leave about four months. So is that sort of the drop-dead date for a decision
Correct,
that you're
yeah.
suggesting, as opposed to, ideally, I would think if we have a decision within the next year or
Yes,
so,
correct.
or
Yeah.
within the next year, that gives everybody time to start lining up and doing the research and lining up the vendor and all that sort of thing. So that's really just a drop-dead date, right?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, yes, that is just to say, anything beyond that is a paper ballot election. There has to be a choice on the method by June 8th of that. We would want something within a year.
Then through you, Mr. Mayor, so what would be kind of your ideal scenario?
Well, if I can
Go ahead.
collect the information needed, I would say either by the end of this year or early next year, where there would be a decision point.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think the whole purpose of council wanting to have an early review of internet voting was that we'd have plenty of time to be able to educate the consumers to get all of the communications together. I think that security is important. The real key is our ability to build confidence in the electorate. And I think that what we want to do is, if we go forward, is to make sure that we have sufficient time to be able to go forward with that. So I think that's important. Regional Councillor.
Yeah, I just had a thought, and that's and I think it should affect the decision timeline, but does it affect cost as well? And I'm wondering what about ranked ballots?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, there would be, if I don't. First of all, I don't know the timing of the decision point around that. I don't know if that's been drafted yet. Even if it would need to go through legislature and be approved.
Yeah, I mean Toronto just did theirs, so
the timing, yeah. And I believe they reversed their decision. Yeah, that would have an impact on when you're trying to speak to the public about process. Having both internet voting and ranked ballot could be challenging.
that's what I'm wondering about. Making me all of a sudden I just thought about that, is like so I think we need to. I'm not saying for sure it affects the decision, and one thing I wouldn't mind checking on is would it affect cost from the providers, or is it still straight 75 cents? Because this is new to them too.
It is the same.
Oh, it is?
Mhm.
Oh, okay. They've confirmed that?
According to the vendors that we've been talking with, they have been planning for the potential. It's just a different algorithm that's used in their system.
So I think and I'm only one person, but I think I'd feel more comfortable knowing where we stand as a council on ranked ballots before making a decision on internet voting, or making them simultaneously, or whatever. But I think, so if we can sometime soon understand the process Toronto went through and what we have to do, and et cetera, that would be helpful as well.
So that might be part of the next level of reporting in terms of the implications there. And I agree, that might be a bit of an overload situation. So we may need to come to a point to saying, where's our priority, the ranked ballot system and/or the internet system. But I think that could be a real challenge to introduce both at the same time.
But if we went through the ranked ballot process, then we'd know maybe it's not an issue, depending on where council's at. So
Okay, any further questions? Be appropriate then for us to receive the presentations and I think also the council extract. And so can I have a motion with that regard? Councillor Zans, Councillor Broom-Plumley. All those in favor? What we'll do then is we'll recess until 11 o'clock for our next presentation. It's 11 o'clock is when the York Region will come forward. There we are. Okay, I'll reconvene our council workshop. This second portion is the Yonge Street and Davis Drive Streetscape Master Plan, and we will be receiving a presentation from Carmen Huey and Mr. Trevor McIntyre, representing York Region as well as the IBI Group. Mr. Nethery, if you could provide us with some introductions, I would appreciate that.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just to the first page of your PowerPoint presentation shows the agenda that we hope to cover today. So briefly, some introductions. Then the team will walk us through the background and visioning workshop summary of what has taken place already. And then there's a couple of different visions, vibrant, green, and active as they're being labeled, and the design concepts that go associated with that. So they're going to be helping us through that and doing a bit of a comparison and probably culminating in what they're characterizing as a bit of a hybrid of the two features. Now, I guess everyone is aware this is a joint exercise that's being done by the region and by us and through the good offices of IBI. So there's cost sharing in terms of the paying of the fees and that sort of thing, and it's been underway for quite a while. And we were hearing a little bit about the urgency associated with the Yonge Street North project. So that's why it was important to get this one out in advance of that. So the team, here we have Trevor McIntyre from IBI and Carmen Huey from the region of York, as well as Darlene Broderick from IBI as well, and we have Steve Collins in the audience as well. So without further ado, I'll throw it over to Carmen, and away we go.
Thank you, Rick. Good morning, Mr. Mayor, local councillors, and regional councillor. I'm here to present to you the Yonge Street and Davis Drive Corridor Streetscape Master Plan. And I just want to walk you through the project schedule as it is aligned to the Yonge Street North Capital Project. Can everyone hear me, by the way?
Maybe if you could pull that microphone a little closer to you, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
How's that? Does that sound better?
That's good.
Okay, thank you. So what you see before you is the key milestones for the Streetscape Master Plan. We have 5 phases within the Streetscape Master Plan, and the project started in April of this year, and it is projected to be completed by February of next year, so February 2016. This is in efforts to align with our capital project for Yonge Street North, from Davis Drive to Green Lane, which York Region is leading. So you can see at this point, we are currently in phase 3 of the Streetscape Master Plan. If I can just use your pointer. Thanks. So we're in phase 3 of the Streetscape Master Plan, and we're here today to provide you with an update on what we have worked on since the visioning workshop back in June of this year, where the mayor was present as well as regional councillor Taylor and your staff as well as region staff. So we're here to provide an update on the Streetscape Master Plan, and our plan is to then present to the public in November of this year, get the feedback from this town council workshop, and then proceed with the phase 4 detailed design guidelines and complete the study with the implementation strategy, maintenance, and capital costs. We will then come back to town council and regional council and make a presentation on the final master plan. This is a snapshot of the Yonge Street North design schedule. As you can see, we're headed into 30% detailed design at this stage, and that's why we've been working very hard to ensure that we can integrate the requirements of the Streetscape Master Plan into the detailed design. We will then be complete with 60% detailed design by next June and 90% in September, and going to pre-tender in 2017. Something I should make very clear about the Streetscape Master Plan is it's a 30-year vision, so it's a long-term vision. The intention is to set a roadmap and a vision for what we expect to see on Yonge Street North, Yonge Street South, Davis Drive East, and West. It's also very important to understand that what you see in the vision is something that we can achieve together in partnership between the region and the town. So that's on a work level, but also from a budget perspective. So we're looking forward to presenting this vision to you. And with that, I'll pass it over to Trevor. Thanks.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay? Good. Thank you very much for having us here, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Regional Councillor, and local councillors. This has been, as Carmen suggested, it has been an ambitious project and a long-term project. And I think some of the opening remarks that came during our workshop with the mayor really reminded us all that this is a long-term vision and that we will try and dovetail this with the current design work that's underway, but that we also should be thinking about this as the long-term planning of this entire corridor, of the Yonge and the Davis corridor. And so we've taken a step back, and through these workshops and through the presentation you'll see today, we've looked at land use, we've looked at the placemaking, we've looked at character, and we're thinking about it as a long-term vision for really planning of the entire corridor. So the road infrastructure, as well as the circulation, the pedestrian infrastructure, as well as the placemaking and wayfinding. So as mentioned, in terms of the context, we know that we have a piece of Viva Next east of Yonge and south of Davis that's shown in pink on the diagram. And then the other four quadrants, or the other four sections, east, north, south, east, and west, we'll talk about today. And we'll talk about them in different sections, because we did deal with them as separate sections, but really the ambition is that we see this cross as being one overall corridor that has a unique and a character that actually can be read as being part of Newmarket. So our objectives were establish a vision, which includes urban design principles, not just transportation and moving of vehicles, a bold, unified streetscape vision that deals with varying land use concepts, a hierarchy of spaces and streetscape typologies. We have some differing cross-sectional requirements, but we also have different land uses, adjacent land uses, that vary from places that are starting to get built up to places that will be built up in the future, to kind of conditions that deal with surface parking and undeveloped land. Provide pedestrian accessibility. Placemaking in terms of the intersections as well as the corridors is very important. We'll show you visions and images today of how we see that unfolding. And then visually, because of the strong connections between Viva Next and the town of Newmarket gateways, it's important that this whole thing tied together as one unified vision. So in terms of the materials and the treatment, you'll see that things are closely tied together. And then lastly, a strong wayfinding strategy. And we see that as people move through this corridor, we want to start thinking about it as not a place that you're actually driving through, but a place that you're actually destined to come to and to stop at and to use the businesses that exist along the corridor and actually enjoy the character of that space, and that it becomes unique to this area. So the context that we talked about, and I don't have to spend much time on this because if you look at the images to the right, you're very familiar with this. You probably drive this every day, and the typical characteristics we'll go through in a moment. So we started with kind of a research and inventory, and then a SWOT analysis. So looking at strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats, and we started that in the workshop. In the case of the workshop, as well as collecting data out in the field. And so the characteristics, if we were to sort of summarize them, wide right-of-way and paved area, and so we range from around 40 meters up to almost 60 meters. Very car-dominant environment, not really a comfortable place for people to walk in its current conditions, as well as there aren't really places where it makes sense to walk, where people actually would be walking from one business to another. It tends to be a very car-oriented environment. Utilitarian pedestrian environment, non-continuous sidewalks, which is characteristic of something in its infancy, of land development in its infancy. Cycling infrastructure is very restricted currently, and it's rare to see cyclists using the area, unless they're actually commuter cyclists that are actually using the road and running through. Minimal street trees, and not really a consistent pattern of street trees in spacing and distance. Numerous large parking asphalt lots, all with individual driveways, which tend to chop up the right-of-way. Frequent consolidated driveways with large lots. Open ditches adjacent to roadway and sidewalks, and we'll see some images of that, which are, again, characteristic of land that hasn't really urbanized yet. Significant grade changes at some properties, and then inconsistent use of retaining walls and grade separations, and then dominant presence of utility poles and infrastructure. So the vision. So our Carmen talked a bit about the process, but we had a visioning workshop on June 17th, and the group that was in attendance. How many people in total?
It was about just over 50.
Around 50, yeah, 50, 60 people over the course of a day. So we had representatives from York Region, town of Newmarket, Rapid Transit, York Region Rapid Transit, and York Region Transit. We had a presentation, a series of presentations showing sort of precedents and some of the ambitions and some of the ideas that we thought should be considered. We had a lot of discussion about streetscape, and we talked about active transportation and the characteristics of how people would walk, how people would cycle through the corridor, and how those changes could best be accommodated. And then we had a design charrette, and in the afternoon we broke into groups, and we kind of split it into, originally we had 4 pieces, and then we ended up tying it into really 2 groups. One that focused more on Yonge Street and the north-south movement of people and development, and then one that worked on Group 2, Davis Drive. The part of our discussion, a big part of our discussion, and starting with the mayor's comments, was really what makes a great street. And when we think of streets, we used to think of streets as just ways to move cars, and we measured the success of those streets based on the number of cars you could actually move. We now are thinking of streets as places that are part of the public infrastructure, and they really represent the heart of the community and the character of the community. And so where you see existing conditions like the left side of this screen that shows car dominance and really not a strong sense of place, we're really trying to move into something which is more like the right side, where intersections are well-defined places, where people would get out of their cars and they would walk, and there would be restaurants and there would be activity, and it would become a destination, viable businesses. I talked about the grade conditions in a non-urbanized environment, and often what you see is what's on the left, which is just let's get the water off the sidewalk, let's get the water off the road, let's get it into a ditch, and then the water runs through the ditch, and if people happen to walk through there and they have to cross it in the wintertime or in the fall, it's not a great environment. It's hard to maintain, it's hard to cut the grass, it's hard to keep those areas from having debris piled up in it when the wind blows. And so as we move towards a more urban environment, we're starting to think about places that in the future, as land develops along the side, we're going to have sidewalks. We're going to have what we used to call kill strips, but they're really detail strips along the edge, where snow can be cleared, but also where there's some protection for the trees. Places where we have urban bioswales, where the sidewalk can actually run into a swale and run through the swale. The water can actually then help the tree grow. It can filter any sediment out of the water before actually putting it back into the storm management system. So pedestrian and cyclist priority. Again, you look at the image on the left and you think as a cyclist what that environment would be like, versus on the right where you have a clearly defined pathway, a place to ride, and a place where you know where cycles should go versus where pedestrians and strollers and the like should go. So balancing all modes of transportation, from the left where you aren't really clear of the separation between uses of transportation. To the right, where you actually have bikeways and clear crossing points and places where pedestrians and cyclists and active transportation users would actually feel safe. Animating the street, so the edges, as opposed to the image on the left that shows car parking and surface parking, ideally to start to show development that's coming up and defining the edge of the road corridor and creating a sense of animation and a sense of use, and restaurants and such that are along that sidewalk. And in terms of the green elements, places where we struggle to find places to plant trees, and even when we do plant trees, because we have hydrocorridor conflicts, we can only plant small trees. And so there isn't much of a visual impact on the environment, versus on the image on the right where you see trees spaced tightly and closely and defining a pedestrian area and creating a nice walkable environment. Pedestrian amenities means just not long sidewalks with no breaks and no place to stop and pause. It means actually putting the right number of benches and street furniture, places to lock up your bikes, and garbage cans and such. So as we know the area, we know that some of the grid of the area, some of the separation of the distances between roadways and driveways is quite great, because of the fact that the area hasn't been urbanized. It hasn't actually gone to a tighter grid. And one of the ambitions as we move forward, and this is part of it is within this study, or anticipating what happens within the study, but part of it is in the future, and that has to do with site plan approvals that are going through. And as land is coming along, how do we actually encourage consolidated driveway entrances rather than random ones? And how do we encourage a tighter, more walkable urban grid? So future opportunities for parking, how we go from a 60-kilometer roadway without defined parking to places where we actually want to have some traffic calming, and we want to encourage some traffic and some on-street parking. And then safe and comfortable cycling environments. And here you show a kind of a cycle track, and whether the cycle track is raised or it's actually separated just with a buffer, but it's well defined and cyclists know how to use it, and they know how it feels more safe for them to use. Accessibility, we have to kind of accommodate all the people who are active today and the people who might not be as active, as well as the seniors, as well as the people with different forms of disability. And we're continuously changing and upgrading what that means in terms of the treatments. And so the truncated domes you see on the right is typical, where there's actually a textured surface that a blind person is able to feel the texture, or a person who doesn't have full sight can actually see a contrast in the color, and they can feel the texture before they step out into traffic. So what we heard from the visioning workshop, from all the input we had from the various groups, is we heard really about three categories here. One was urban design. So how do we create identity, animate the streets, reduce the scale of the right-of-way? So it's about the built form and about what we're actually seeing when we're out there. Second is the green infrastructure. And so what does that mean? It means how we can be sustainable with our stormwater management, how we design for low-impact development, so how we retain stormwater management on site and don't load up our storm systems, and how we keep a greener-looking environment, a greener, healthier-looking environment. And part of that is actually reducing the amount of hard surface paving and actually looking at places where we have permeable paving, and we actually allow the groundwater to actually recharge in those areas. And then last, active transportation, so the balanced multimodal corridor. What does that actually mean? And so it means bikes, busways, and active forms of transportation take priority over private vehicles. And so we had, the two groups went off on their own and kind of looked at, well, what is the vision? And we said, you need to come back with a one-line statement of a vision. And so the Yonge Street group went away and said, and came back with a statement that that sounded like this. Yonge Street is a vibrant green ribbon of urban infrastructure balancing the multimodal needs of the community. And so what that meant was let's actually focus on the green and on the green ribbon of activity, and let's make that priority over the cars and the vehicles, and then let it work with the built form, I think. Group 2, the Davis Drive vision, looked at it slightly differently and said, well, let's look at this as a balanced multimodal green corridor. And so it didn't put as much emphasis on the green, but it said, let's get all the active uses, and let's make sure those active uses are all balanced. And so we took that, we put it together into kind of an overall vision, and there were 3 things that came out of that were sort of resounding comments that came out of both groups. One was it needs to be vibrant. So how do we actually have a more vibrant urban form? Second, it needs to be really green. And so we need to emphasize the trees and reduce the amount of hard surface. And then third, we have to have opportunities for active uses. And we have to get people out there and create the places that give them a reason to get out and walk and cycle and to use transit. So the master plan, we then went away and we prepared 2 concepts in response, kind of combining some of the ideas that we had actually heard. And so the 2 concepts, and I'm going to touch on both of them here, and then I'm going to touch on a third, which is, I'd call it really a hybrid between the 2, because neither one was sort of right or wrong, but after our further discussions with the group and with Carmen and Peter and everyone else who was involved, we felt that really it wasn't really one or the other, but it was a combination. And then that combination we've actually been able to carry forward in terms of the detail. So the first one we called Green at Yonge and Davis, and the second we called Active at Yonge and Davis. So Green at Yonge and Davis, I'll start with that one. So the focus there was, okay, what does green mean? Well, it means maximize sustainable planting. So let's make decisions based on green. So standard sidewalk, cycling lanes, vehicular lane widths are used. And so the idea there was let's not overbuild any of our hard surfaces, but let's keep as much green as we can. Okay? Let's actually use cables to maximize tree canopy. So as opposed to giving up already and just putting in small trees, because we can't manage how they might in the future work with overhead wires, let's actually plan in such a way that we can actually anticipate how we're going to maintain those trees, but allow bigger trees to actually be used. And there's new techniques that are actually sort of available to allow that to happen. And root deflectors and things like that allow it to happen. So trees planted closer together to create an urban grove. So where there's an impact of planting more trees more frequently and tightening things up, it actually slows down the traffic and it makes a more desirable environment than spacing trees 10 or 12 meters apart and pulling them 9 meters back from the edge of the curb. Green walls used to maximize green space and create cohesion on backlotted residential. We know we have areas where we have rear-lotted residential, where you have different fence conditions coming along, and the corridor doesn't read very strongly because you tend to have such an eclectic kind of backyard environment. So are there places that we can actually plant those in such a way that we actually focus on the corridor and don't treat it as a rear yard or a rear lot? And then the median space on Yonge Street, and one of the ideas that was there was that if we are preserving for future transit down that corridor on Yonge North, for instance, do we use that as a place to actually plant trees and actually almost farm trees that you can use there so that people see the enjoyment of them over time? But if you need to actually take them and relocate them to the edges of the right-of-way, that's a possibility. So it's greening for the next 20 years, let's say. Stormwater management, what does that mean? So infiltration planters that I referred to earlier, bioswales to collect the stormwater and reduce the impact on the storm sewers, and then the swim management pond. If we have swim management ponds, let's avoid doing dugouts that are fenced off in such a way that it sterilizes the land, and let's instead look at something which is more of a system, a green system, more organic, can be planted and becomes a more park-like setting. LID, the low-impact development, we referred to a bit there in terms of permeable paving, for instance. If we do have areas that over the next 10 years, over the next 20 years, are going to be large surface parking areas, rather than actually do regular paving, do we actually look at permeable paving that actually reduces the impact on the adjacent swim systems? And you see it all over Europe, and you see it, and you're seeing it more and more frequently here. The technology is getting much better, and it's more commonly used now. And systems in place to utilize stormwater and reuse stormwater, and then plants are selected so that they are drought tolerant, and they're actually plant species that don't require like high degrees of water, or choosing the right plant material for the right location. And then green space as community amenity. We talked already about storm ponds as being places that aren't fenced off but become part of the amenity. Urban agriculture was a suggestion that was made, and urban agriculture is kind of an interesting way that you might think, okay, does that mean we're going to fence it off and create community gardens along the side of the street? Well, they sometimes don't look that great. But instead, there might be places where actually we can have some community gardening in raised planters in such a way, in an organized fashion, that it actually engages the community and it tells a story about the value of the edges of the right-of-way. So cycle tracks and pedestrian circulation connected to existing trails. So there's a lot of other effort already on bike trails leading to other trail systems, and we have to make sure, or we have been focusing on how that actually ties into our corridor. And then there was an idea about Streetscape acting as a living lab, educating the community about environmental issues. And again, that's as we, in the industry, there are changes to the way you plant trees and the way that you actually keep them alive and have higher success rates. And so there are a lot of programs working now with arboricultural companies, as well as with universities that are looking at how to more efficiently use that right away, and how to have higher success rates. And so it becomes a living lab, and if the universities are actually working there and people from the community are engaged in it, they tend to take a lot more interest and care in the edges of the boulevard. So, in summary on that concept, if you look at the green band across the top, all streetscape decisions are informed by creating a green and resilient environment. So the idea there was not that you don't focus on the other things in terms of active transportation, but you choose and you make decisions based on the priority of, we want Yonge and Davis to be very, very green. So maximum green infrastructure, a bold tree-lined corridor, increase the quantity, the level, the diversity of the trees. So you feel like you're driving almost through a forest in places. And other places it's like an urban forest, or it's urban groves, but it has a distinct character as you drive through it. Plant trees at 6 to 8 meters on center. So the ambition there is to try and get the tree canopies to be touching, so that the squirrels and the active wildlife are actually moving through the canopies, and the canopies, the trees are no longer lollipops, but it's creating an urban green environment at an upper level. Selects the right species we spoke of. Light pavement to reduce heat island effect. So that's just the color of the pavements that we're actually choosing, and providing some shade so that we're not overheating large urban parking lots. Utilize sustainable strategies wherever we can. Pervious pavement, and then vegetated bioswales and rain gardens. And rain gardens are another form of a bioswale, but basically taking the water, using it, filtering it before it is either recycled or it actually enters the storm systems. So the second option, the second concept that we actually looked at was we called active at Yonge and Davis. And so in a similar fashion, this concept looked at mobility as really the driver of this concept. So mobility, what does that mean? Continuous cycle tracks and sidewalks are encouraged to encourage active transportation. Cycle tracks are generous. They have more ample room. They're segregated from bike circulation, and they avoid conflict. Cycle tracks, roadside location, facilitate passing. Pedestrians are free from obstacles and enjoy continuous sidewalks. So again, decisions are made based on active transportation. So safety, intersections are given visual importance for increased safety. So all the places where we actually have let's say a bike lane that's running through and crossing pavement, it needs to be properly marked. There's warnings and there's safe crossing points. Where we can, try and put raised cycle tracks. And by raised cycle tracks, I think you know what I mean, where the cycle track is actually raised, let's say 4 inches above the road surface, and or has some physical separation that makes the person on the bike feel safer and feel separated from the cyclists. And cyclists are, where possible, are separated from pedestrians by a planted boulevard. You'll see when we get into the detail of some of the concepts that there are places where you obviously have to bring things together, because we can't have independent systems of pedestrians crossing and cyclists crossing and that they don't talk to each other, because the cars would never be able to get back out onto the road. So there are places where there has to be a bit of meandering and a bit of ribboning where the bike has to come closer to where the vehicles actually are. Accessibility, so big priority in terms of sidewalks, in terms of direct pedestrian routes between transit and community amenities, accessible curbs, and AODA compliant. Okay. And then wayfinding, again, if you're expecting people to be out there and walking and running and using these corridors, how do we actually communicate to them where they go? And so clear delineations, universal accessible wayfinding techniques, distinct wayfinding techniques, paving patterns, signage, banners, and then cycle, running, and walking activity loops. So depending on people's level of activity and their degrees of mobility, allowing places where they could actually go down a block and loop back and get back to where they started, versus they could go for a 5K and or 2 or 3K, or there could be some looping system that goes through and that addresses all the typical users. And so the blue banner here sort of summarizes that the active concept. So all streetscape decisions informed by optimizing active transportation. So what are the key features? Maximize the opportunities for active transportation, a balanced multimodal corridor, elevate the importance of pedestrian cyclists, provide wide sidewalks, wide bike lanes with a buffer to improve safety, implement creative aesthetic separation techniques, so whether it's colors or bands or different paving markings, and then improve access to public transit spots. So when we took those two concepts and compared them, we actually went and physically applied the cross-section all along the corridor to different conditions along the corridor, so that we knew that if we were only 39 meters versus 60 meters, what was the impact of that? And it comes down to, when you're out there and you look at the size of the right-of-way, it feels like there's a lot of land. But we have gotten into some screaming matches, not amongst us, but amongst everyone involved, because it literally comes down to inches. And how wide you make a sidewalk, or how wide you make a bike lane, and how big the buffer is, and how the curb transition is. You come down to inches, and if not millimeters. And all of a sudden that 60 meters is no longer enough, or the 39 meters is no longer enough. And so you'll see in these cross sections where we have made decisions based on how wide every piece should be and the balanced approach to how you plan for that. So some of the typical cross sections north of Dawson Manor, which you can see on there. So this is probably one of the narrow condition, so around 39 and a half. And apologize, the only way to show, because of the size of it, you have to sort of show it like this, but on your screens you can probably read dimensions if you choose to. And this shows like what the existing cross-section looks like today in terms of the number of lanes, in terms of the sidewalk, in terms of the hydro poles, and everything that's actually out there. And then when you apply either the active concept or the green concept to it, how do those actually differ? And so you can see the differing here on the green concept. You can see we actually show more trees. On the west side, we have a double row of trees. We have a double row of trees running down through the center. We have single on the right-hand side. We've introduced sort of planted green ornamental grasses that actually separate activities that you can see in 3 different bands across there on the sides of the boulevard as well as in the centers. And bus lanes, and this is all obviously this is also preserving the center right away that could be in the future could be rapid transit. On the active one, you can see we've actually, if you look at the little symbols there, you can see where the bikes are versus where the pedestrians are as well, and where they're actually side by side versus where they're separated. On the active one, there's an ambition to try and separate them so that you don't have sidewalks and bike lanes right side by side where people are crossing and you have potential conflict. And so all the dimensions we've gone through and we've tested, and in the case of this one on the active, we said the middle corridor, maybe if it's not green, and if we're preserving that future median, that could be public art. It could be a series of public art elements that actually could go through there. And if rapid transit comes in the future, you can pick up those public art elements and actually move them to corner sites. Yeah. North of St. John's Side Road, there you can see an image of what the environment is like. So this is like more the type of I'll call it a rural cross section, which has open space on both sides, and some grade change, as you can see. So what's there today? That's 59-meter public right-of-way, guardrails on the side, and then a slope back to natural environment. So sort of a tight road cross section. And cycle track on only one side, yeah. And so here we looked at a kind of a green solution, which meant adding some green to the cross section, keeping the multi-use trail on one side and pedestrian on the opposite side, and actually trying to not widen the right-of-way in any way, but actually keep it tight and keep the natural environment to the side. Get rid of the still allow some greening and some sort of naturalization of it, and you can see some additional planting on the east side, on the top on the green section. On the active cross section below, bike trail separated on the east side, pedestrian on both sides. But again, here kind of restricting the amount that's going to green, but keeping it as more as active, separate active multiple use corridors. And then I'll just continue through. I won't go through these in too much detail, but so Davis Drive east of Eagle. So there you can see the condition, the typical sort of large parking lot kind of condition, where we haven't built to the edge of Davis Drive yet. What the cross section looks like today, we've got a grass swale or an open ditch on the east side, kind of a bermed area on the west side, hydro poles that are dominant and wide cross section, but exposed parking. And so on the green option, where do we actually plant trees? We managed to get a sort of a double row of trees on the east side of the canopy, or of the right-of-way. On the south, sorry, yeah, I'm on Davis now. On the south side, and then double rows as well on the north side. And then not a whole lot of difference on the active, other than the separation of the bike from the pedestrian. Okay, we'll go through these because I think we can go through these fairly quickly. Belfry, so Belfry is one of the rear lotted conditions that you see right now. And 31 meter right away, so that's a very narrow, it's probably our narrowest, I think. Okay, and so they're allowing for some green in the rear yards and defining the edges, but there isn't that much room within the corridor. The combined bike and the multimodal trail is on both sides. And versus active, we've separated on the one side. Okay. So we then went through a kind of comparison. I won't go through this in detail, but we went through a comparison of the two, the green and the active, and sort of where did we satisfy certain things, where were they balanced, and what was the decision-making process. And I think we just skipped through that. And then we came up with a kind of a hybrid concept. And the hybrid concept, this is a little hard to read, but the hybrid concept actually starts to balance the multimodal with the green and starts to apply, and really it gets down into really tweaking the trail locations and the sizes and the dimensions across the right-of-way all the way through. And I think more importantly, tying the trail systems and the active transportation system into the existing trail connections that are actually planned for. And so the cross sections, you'll see the resultant cross sections are kind of a balance of placemaking and of how we're using the median, how we're using the corridor, how we're separating the bicycle and pedestrian uses on the side. And our cross section typically is, in some cases you'll see a turning lane, but generally it's a 3-and-3 cross section.
And we put the bike lane on the inside.
And the bike lane on the inside, thanks, yeah.
Trees are protected with a raised barrier curb to protect them from salt spray.
Yeah. And that was there. We had a lot of debate about the location of the bikes and about the bike safety. And there's a lot of debate these days about urban cycling, and you'll hear a lot of different opinions about the commuter cyclist who would prefer to be on the road and just running straight on through, versus the more recreational cyclist who actually wants to have physical separation and wants to feel like they're away from the road and feel like they're safer. And they're more the Saturday, Sunday cyclists that will go out, and they'll go out with their kids, or they'll go out with their family, or with their buggy on the back. And it's a whole different sort of mentality. One of the things I think that we feel is that until this area starts to urbanize, and really urbanize, like where we will be in 20 or 25 years, the recreational cyclist is the one you want to get out there, because there aren't that many destinations that they're destined for, and they want to feel safe. And once they get out there, then the other urban cyclists, the commuter cyclists, will come and will run through. Now, having said that, we actually looked at ways that we can make the cycling safe and efficient for the people that are actually using it as a means of transportation. And I think we came up with a fairly good and balanced approach. I guess we could talk now about the detail of that in terms of dimensions, which would be an important thing. So the dimensions, the dimension on the bikeway, the minimum dimension on the bikeway is 1.5 meters. Okay, the minimum dimension for the sidewalks is about 2 meters. And then one of the things that, because we live in Canada and we have winters, we always have to think about what happens to the snow, and how do you actually apply the snow, and where do you apply the snow to? And so we have to have areas that are, that we can actually provide some snow storage within the public right-of-way. And so we've accommodated that as well. With a half-meter, I think we ended up with at least a half-meter area, which is defined on the public right-of-way. Now, sure, snow will be piled onto the private as well, but we need to, within the public right-of-way, have enough area to plow snow. And as Darlene said, the planters, you can see the planters on the side are raised so that the salt spray that comes off the road actually helps protect the plants that are in those planting beds, and it gets more soil volume so that you can actually have healthier trees. The trees actually require a lot of soil, and so we have kind of an urban conditioned tree, but for the most part we're actually creating something that's kind of cost effective. And you'll see in the plans in a moment where the trees are actually, how the trees are actually planted in large planters, and then how the trees at the very corners where you have areas where you have higher pedestrian volume, how they can be planted in grates and continuous tree trenches below. We can talk about that detail if you like.
Cycle track at the intersections too.
Yeah, and cycle track at the intersections, and you'll see in the plans, you'll see how the cycle tracks, as Carmen just noted, how the cycle tracks have to come back so that at the intersections we have to bring people together so there are safe crossing points, so that you're not crossing back away from where the vehicles can be and crossing behind vehicles. So if we take that concept, I won't go through it in detail here, but we apply it to the different conditions. So there we see the St. John's side road condition. So side slope, natural area. And yeah, bike lane separated on or combined on both sides. And that's just because we have such a restricted right of way, but going in both directions. Okay. Yep. East of Eagle. There you see a more kind of urban, you can see when it all comes together, it's a more urban cross-section, double rows of trees on both sides, comfortable pedestrian sidewalk in between, and then an efficient cycle track, but cycle track that has a bit of separation, and still the cyclist would feel safe on both sides. So a curb with what, 4-inch? 6-inch. 6-inch grade separation. Davis at Belfry, and again that's tight, that's 31.7, that's probably the smallest, where you had backlotting. And the backlotting then, actually by putting the active transportation on the backside, it's separated and you feel like you're in a bit of a park environment. So the urban cross-section itself close to the road. Okay, yeah. And then the plans we show, I'll show you a series of plans here. And the plans start to show like what an intersection actually might look like. So you can see on the corners where the transportation corridor might actually run through. So you can see the colored paving running through. Colored paving through the intersection, that starts to define the intersections as urban places. And on the four corners, opportunities for public art, opportunities for signage like the Newmarket sign, or opportunities for, in the case if you look at the northeast corner there, if there's a grade separation and a plaza entrance, you need to actually separate grade.
This is part of the Viva Next streetscape, and the cycle track is at this particular location, it's in the street. We continued that through the intersection. Bike lane is on the traffic side, but then it swings up into the boulevard where it's protected from traffic and buffered by the trees.
Yeah, So that allows, and that actually allows sort of a safe bike zone, but it coordinates with pedestrians that are actually walking across without increasing the distance. And the view on the right, you can sort of see what an intersection in axonometric would look like. So you create an urban place. There's places for public art. There's places for some furniture. There's some banding. There's patterns. And then there's a clear message that if you're walking along, when you get to that corner, you know that you're about to enter the road zone. There's truncated dome pavers that run across, and then you're stepping out into the intersection. There's color contrast in the paving. Okay. Here's another little demonstration plan at Aspenwood. So you can see the median there. As Darlene said, you can see the way the bikeway actually runs across here, and it's pulled back. It's separated from the road. As it crosses driveways, it's clearly marked, but when it comes to an intersection, it tightens up in the intersection. There you can see an HOV lane, like a dedicated transit lane on the outside. And then in places like this, because you do have people disembarking from transit and people that are cutting across the corner, you want to restrict the sort of the jaywalking that happens close to the corner by providing a really clear crossing point that's well defined where the plaza is, but also by planting up the median in through the center, people are less likely to try and jaywalk across on an angle and cut through there. And then on the urban side, you can see the trees in grates that allows people to actually walk through there. So there's wider walking surfaces where you have heavier pedestrian volumes. When you get further away, as you do on the top of this sketch, you can see you reduce the grates because it's less expensive, and having the raised planters gives additional separation and helps with the health of the trees.
If I may add.
Yeah, please.
We're utilizing the streetscape in this condition as a gateway. At Aspenwood, we're a little bit south of the town boundary, so we thought we would celebrate the entrance into the town with a streetscape that notifies pedestrians, cyclists, motorists that they're coming into the town of Newmarket. So I just want to point out a few details. Trevor mentioned most of them, but we've got banner poles here as well, which animate the street and also act as a signature that we're entering into the town of Newmarket.
Yeah, we haven't talked much about vertical furniture, but that's actually desirable because it does tighten up the right-of-way and it slows traffic down and it creates a different cadence, a different rhythm for people that are normally driving along a very linear, fast motorway. So it slows them down at the intersection. And even tightening up the tree spacing and those things, it tends to slow everybody down and create an urban place. London Road and Bonshaw, again, you see a lot of the same elements there about like bringing the bikes up to the intersection, clearly defined intersection. Bike boxes, places for the cyclists to actually stop and pause. Cyclists always create a lot of confusion at these type of corners because, as we all know, cyclists become pedestrians when it's more convenient, and they become vehicles when it's more convenient. They kind of follow their own rules. And part of this is actually trying to create a clear set of rules that the bikes know how they have to cross streets and where they should actually stop and where they feel safe. What else? Anything else? Sorry, Darlene?
We've also added feature unit paving at
Oh,
the intersections,
yeah.
just to signify that it's an important intersection with potential for increased urbanization.
Yeah. And one thing to just note on these plans, and I guess it comes back to some of our initial points about the long-term vision. The one thing here is you may be on the back side of the right-of-way line land uses will change and will continue to intensify over time. And so we're always thinking about, like, what happens if there's surface parking there and a big box store for the next 10 years? And then what happens when a retail store or a little restaurant gets added on the corner? And how do you actually start to hide those parking lots and screen those parking lots by creating edges? And how do those edges tie into here? And the desire is that you don't have to change what you're putting in place here. So that if you did create a little store on that corner or a little restaurant on the corner, that the plaza could actually open up directly onto the sidewalk, and you wouldn't really change. You know that there's daylight triangles, so there's view corridors and such, but you could put a plaza on that corner and still keep it open and not change the nature of where the trees are, where the green infrastructure is. St. John Side Road, and again, this actually shows, I think, quite successfully that by actually not just paving or changing the color within the intersection, but sometimes actually showing it, like pulling back and doing, let's say, 50 meters on a side road condition, allows you to kind of introduce the language and start to urbanize what's happening there and start to create a place. But if it's not a really urban environment, or you don't anticipate it's going to be really urban, you may not end up with trees in grates, but you may end up with a kind of a raised planter condition like that. Still ample room for pedestrian movement, ample room for like special planting in those planters in the springtime or in the fall time, and so it can become part of the city's sort of own language about how they actually treat that street. And then, as Darlene pointed out before, in the median, once you get back away from the corner, then urban sort of banner poles that start to talk about the adjacent community.
If I can just add a note about this slide. So this area is technically part of the town of Aurora, but what IBI Group did was just kind of extended the vision a little further to look at holistically how we treat the entries into town of Newmarket. So the town of Newmarket boundary is about 200 meters north of here, but the idea of creating a gateway is still something, if the town would like to pursue, we could work closely with Aurora to help make it look more seamless. So just wanted to add to Trevor's notes about that.
Okay. Yeah. This is at Bathurst. I think most of the same points from the previous one actually apply, just in terms of pulling back the paving, and yet not doing a real kind of urbanized cross section. Still allowing it to be as very green, because you can plant the trees along there, but you can also have the kind of the understory. Ashton Road and Carlson. So again, not the most urban condition, but it just shows how the highlight, how the intersection can be actually highlighted, what the transition is, and how little urban, I'll call them little parkettes almost on the four corners. Okay. So I think that's where we are today, in anticipation of moving forward in terms of open houses and getting more feedback. And so part of this was to, I think, bring you up to speed, and also to get comments and see if there are things that we have missed and other things we should be addressing. And so with that, I think we'd like to just open it up to your comments.
Questions? Okay. We've got a number of projects north of Davis Drive. An example, Slessor Square. Would this alter or change the way that Slessor Square would interface with Yonge Street North at all? Or is this going to be guiding the way that we get the final touches into Slessor Square?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think the notion of that kind of development generically along these corridors has been taken into account by the team. You heard Trevor a moment ago talk about the example of a restaurant or something that might address the corner and that sort of thing. Certainly, it was a very urban solution on the Spusser property, so you would have probably some kind of hard surface in front of those buildings in any event. It would probably be just lining up against. Probably wouldn't have a visual demarcation. Probably look like it was all one. So I think that's what's envisioned by the stuff that we're seeing here.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, members of council? Councillor Bazance.
Yes, thank you, and thank you very much for the presentation. It's very exciting. I'm just kind of sad that I may not be around to see in 30 years' time, or 30 years' time I'm not going to be using the bike path, I don't think. But my question relates to, and I actually have two questions, Mr. Mayor. One with respect to Newmarket's secondary plan and how this integrates with some of the thinking that we've already done with this. And then the second question relates to, I guess, similar to Mayor's question with respect to development. I know, for example, that the northwest corner of St. John's Side Road and Yonge Street has now been slated for a new development to go in there. So that's going to change that particular corner. And our plan is to have the intensification around Yonge and Davis, so a much more, I guess, urbanized area. Could you comment on that?
Sure. I mean, I think we did look at the secondary plan, and I think there were some. I may not have these terms right, but I know there was an ambition to do what I would call more frequent neighborhood parks, like little pocket parks, and it was kind of like a hierarchy of green spaces and what those green spaces would be like. And we actually thought that was actually kind of a nice ambition, and it actually worked well with us in terms of these intersections, because these little urban intersections don't have to be necessarily huge. They can be small places that are convenient little places. And if there is a little pocket park next to the corner, having the urban environment there and recognizing it and showing it, it's quite easy to merge with the urban sort of streetscape that we're actually showing. The difficult thing for you and for your staff is to, when someone submits an application, to know how to give them direction. Because if you treat every project as a one-off and there's nothing to try and tie it into, I can see it would be difficult to explain to the proponent that, well, we have an ambition, and 30 years from now we'd like to be doing something. And hopefully this document becomes the tool that when someone's reviewing a site plan, they can actually pull it out and say, okay, does it work? And if the proponent is doing something like turning their back on the street, or taking the all the refuse, the garbage in the loading and servicing area and dumping it on the street side, then you can say, guys, no, we're not approving that. We need to flip it around, and you need to treat it in such and such a way. So they can actually tie into this. And even if parts of it are not built yet, if you have that ambition and everyone understands it, I think it would be. That's how I would kind of use this as a tool to help your SPA process. Does that help at all?
Yeah, to a degree, because I think one of the concerns that I have is that, we put plans in place, as we know, and then a proponent comes along and has a very different idea, and if it gets to the Ontario Municipal Board, the Ontario Municipal Board doesn't look at what plans may be contemplated for the future or even approved by the various levels of government. The proponent can go ahead and do whatever, as long as they meet the other provincial planning documents and acts and so forth. So, this is a very ambitious and I think desirable sort of concept and plan and vision, which is where we should and want to be going. But the degree to which it then has some teeth and leverage to sort of say, you can plan what you want, but this is what you have to plan towards, I think is very important.
Mm-hmm. And I can say that, I mean, I can give you an example of a project in Mississauga where the master plan, I'll call it, for rapid transit actually shows where the bikeway or a mixed bikeway and multi-use trail is to be located relative to the BRT, to the rapid transit that's going along here, Ontario. And we were actually working on the flip side, on the architectural side on a project. And when we submitted our applications, we weren't aware of the fact that there was this ambition to put that trail in. When that was introduced to us, then it allowed us to take the building, pull the building back by another 3 meters or 6 meters, I can't recall at the time, and actually adjust it and accommodate and tie it together. But without the master plan, we would never have known that, and the building would have been built tighter to the street, and it would have been a missed opportunity. So I think this is exactly what you're referring to, and there's nothing that's overly onerous in terms of the proponent, but they just need to understand, like, what is your ambition, and if your ambition is building this corridor, what's the right thing to do, then it's a good tool to help you with your planning approvals.
Thank you. So what this does is it sets out a framework for dialogue as we're looking at proposals as they come forward. So some of the examples are Schlesser Square, for example, and the Young and Millard proposal. As long as we know where we want to take that overall design. In the absence of that, then we haven't got anything that we can move forward. So that's good. I'm very excited about the fact that you're giving more emphasis on LID design. I'm sure there's some people over there that are happy to see that. So that's a great initiative, and I think that's an important step forward. Regional Councillor?
I think I'm a little confused by the subheadings in some of the different sections, like Davis Drive east of, and then it says east of Eagle. Why does it say east of Eagle? Does it, like, and when I look at the original map, the area that this is looking at is everything on Davis and Young outside of Viva, right? Or wrong?
Correct.
Is it just where the cross sections cut?
Yeah, I think it's where it's...
Yeah. I think, we'll flip to it.
I think
yeah.
I know what
I'm worried when it goes to the public, like, do they understand, is this the first heading for Davis Drive West, it says east of Eagle. What does that, why do we have the words east of Eagle there? What does that mean? I get north of St. John's because that's the border, but.
Yeah. Oh, it's just on the, yeah. Actually, it's kind of a technical thing, and we can take it off, but it just actually shows, if you look on the top right, exactly where the cross-section's taken. It's describing the yellow bar that shows where the cross-section's taken. So it's kind of a...
Will the cross-section be different west of Eagle?
It could be, yeah, it is different, yeah.
It is different,
Yeah.
okay.
So, and it may be just a clarification that when you go public, that maybe we just define it as cross-section east of Eagle.
Or an example. I just think it's almost getting too technical for the public. Like,
Okay.
every piece of cross-section will be a little bit different, but what they really need is just a vision of, in general, what's it going to look like.
Yeah.
I don't know if you explain it as this is an example, because then you've got the same thing like west of Belfry.
Yeah.
And you've got a line almost like it's a boundary, as opposed to, that's exactly where the cross-section is.
Yeah.
You start thinking, does this only go up to there or not, or just go past? Or,
I see what you're saying, yeah.
so I don't know how you can sort of make that clearer. I think also you should probably anticipate some members of the public asking why put the bike lanes into the boulevards, and then when they join up to Viva, they go on street. Why does it make sense to have them on street on Viva, but not on street elsewhere? I have a feeling the answer is just because Viva's done and that's the way it is, and now we're looking at a different model. But if there's a a better answer.
Well, actually, Viva Young Street, the bike lanes are raised. It's just as it approaches the intersection, there's a right-hand turn lane.
But they're raised, but they're on street, right?
No,
No, they're not. They're with the pedestrians?
sorry, they're raised, but they're adjacent to the car lane.
Right. They're not in the boulevard. Because when they come in, when you showed it, they come in and they sort of change significantly at Young to go
That's correct.
on the other side of the tree. So it's,
That's correct.
you're more or less the raised with the cars in Viva and with the pedestrians in the boulevard on the rest. And the rationale behind that, why does it make sense for one to be one way and one the other? I don't know if you can answer it now, great, but if not, I think we probably expect that question. Another question I think will get asked is the cycling treatment of Viva on Davis, which is largely non-existent. I think I'm not even positive. I think they might be marking it as Sharrows, but I don't even know if they're doing that in the hospital range, et cetera.
It's a shared bike car lane. It's not a dedicated bike lane because it's property constrained.
But shared and identified how? Will it be with Sharrows or no? I don't think so. So it's when we say it's shared car bike lane, it means you can go on the lane.
Yeah.
So you know, I think we've got. So Young Street is such a great opportunity because it's the continuous bike lanes, one form or another. So my other comment, I guess, would be just that. My question actually really would be, in the charrette, et cetera, in the workshops, there was this sense of treating Young Street North quite differently. And I think at one time, maybe on the west side, there was a vision or an idea for an enhanced boulevard space that could be open for vendors or et cetera, that kind of thing. And not that that's necessarily the answer we go with, but my question is, I mean, I could see from the cross sections it's different, but conceptually, everything is uniform. And I'm wondering, it just seems to me that Young Street North is so very, I mean, the other three are largely, if not entirely, but largely residential areas, backed residential, I mean, and Young Street North is completely different. So was there a thought of trying to do something very different there, or is there more of a need to be conceptually consistent?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. We do have ambitions to do something more vibrant on Young Street North, but I think with the somewhat constrained right-of-way, due to the fact that we do have to account for the BRT and
Right.
the land that's required for that, what the plan will strive to do is to set the stage for that vibrant type of environment, but on the private side, through site plan agreements. We can then, I think there's a 3-meter setback requirement that's required for that.
Mm-hmm.
And in that space, perhaps that's where some of the vibrancy can occur. The other option is to possibly in the future partner with the town to gain additional property for that kind of activity. But at this time, we have been working within the existing right-of-way that we have, which from a fiscal perspective is more realistic at this point.
Definitely more realistic, but if we were going to be more ambitious, wouldn't we have to signal it now for the process?
Yep, absolutely.
I mean, I know exactly what you're referring to, because Upper Canada, we were talking about the fact that we have some land, or a lot of land, and in the future, as that gets developed, how could we actually, what's the ambition for how you actually kind of borrow more right-of-way, like, or how you expand that right-of-way. And I'm wondering whether I know we purposely kind of pulled back and said, well, let's show what's within the right-of-way, because it's always dangerous to show what's on someone else's land. However, there's no reason that we don't do an expanded plan, an illustrative plan that says, with future coordination with private landowners, there's opportunities
Conceptual opportunities or something.
And you remember Jamal was one who, as an engineer, who quite ambitiously said, "Oh, why does the cycle lane have to stay straight? Could it not wind?" And could it? And that's partly where the ribbon idea came from. Mm-hmm. We could actually expand the plan as an illustrative and just say this is a demonstration plan for how you work with the private sector to create a more ambitious plan, especially when there's big landowners.
That's a very good point.
Yeah.
Especially being a 30-year plan, I
Yeah.
think we could definitely
Yeah.
accommodate that.
And that's my last question, is just that point, and some of the other questions were around this, about sort of how and when does this all take place? But how the private property owners abut it are directed by this over many, many, many years, but within the right-of-way, am I correct, though, that this is, if whatever finally is approved, would take place through road reconstruction at that appropriate time over many, many years as well? Is that how does that work even procedurally? Does this get approved by the region and then it's sort of baked into all budgets, or is it? So in other words, Will, if this moves through, and you said that the urgency, would Yonge Street North, when the work is being done in 2017 or 18 or whenever it is, would that instantly get this configuration? Is that how the?
Mr. Nohammer, in terms of, I think that's one of the things that's creating the sense of urgency that we have, is that we're going forward with the Yonge Street project, and we want to make sure that that has some degree of influence on the final design, but I'll let you speak to that.
Yes, certainly, through you, Mr. Mayor. That is the idea, that this master plan, corridor master plan, helps guide and inform not only development applications as they come forward, but also the regions and the municipalities' capital projects as they come forward. For instance, the Yonge Street North reconstruction north of Davis will be coming forward, and it is currently in the early design stages, and the design will be wrapping up in 2016 with construction and utility relocations proposed for 2017, and the construction of the road in 2018. But this is a long-term plan, and I think every single element that you've seen today may not be implemented all at once with every single reconstruction. I think some of those decisions will have to as well be made through the design process as to how they might fit in the context of the time when the design is undertaken. I think we're all hopeful that many of the features will at least be planned for, and curbs will be located in such a manner that they will not have to be relocated. But the full implementation of the design may take many years. I don't know if that answers the question in its entirety, but I think it's just trying to paint a picture that this will guide capital construction projects, and on a budgeting basis that will have to be implemented over time.
Okay, so I guess, and I understand it because the answer can't be entirely clear, but I'm even having struggling a little bit, sort of thinking, how would I explain to somebody how this becomes reality? And so I guess the challenge is for the public consultation. How do you create a reasonable expectation with the public that this is a master plan that will either, will guide and either partially or fully be implemented, perhaps the next time the road is reconstructed, but perhaps partially after that in another iteration. So I don't know how you manage that, but I think people are wondering, like, so they're thinking almost like Viva. Oh, so when's this happen? What's the? So I think we got some challenge there. My last comment I want to quickly make, and I'm doing it partially because Steve's here, but I've raised it with our staff as well. I think we really need to give some thought to. We had a circumstance a while ago where a lot of our east-west corridors in East Gwillimbury and Newmarket, et cetera, were under work at the same time, and we've got the potential for that on the north-south now, with Bathurst finishing 2016-17, this starting 2017-ish, Leslie Street possibly, Bayview, and Bathurst, et cetera. So I think we need to give some thought to that. I don't have a firm opinion, but I'm a little concerned about starting this and having it starting in 2017, but full-blown in 18, when Viva, we know, will not be done until the end of 18 at best on the southern portion of Yonge. So I really think we need to give a lot of thought about the timing of this. And while this is important work, if we have to delay one section that's been in the planning for many, many years by 1 year to make sure we don't frustrate our public too much, I think we need to give that some thought. So I just want to put that out there. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to come back to the question about messaging out to the community. You've gone through this process elsewhere in the region, and what activities have you undertaken to help the community understand what the master plan is? Or is this the first master plan as far as streetscapes go?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, this is the first streetscape master plan for Newmarket. 2 years ago, we had done one for Richmond Hill, Vaughan, and Markham, and we had gone out to the public on 2 separate information sessions, and it was very well received. We did get comments at both sessions as well as at a village festival, which we then integrated into our final plans. If I may just go back to Regional Councillor Taylor's question regarding the funding and the implementation. Part of the impetus of this master plan is not only the Yonge Street North capital project, but also it is a mechanism by which the town can leverage funding from the region's municipal streetscape partnership program. So the way that program works is it's a cost-sharing program between the region and local municipalities on streetscape enhancements. So as part of the design process, we can then determine what those streetscape enhancements are, what they're valued at, and then the town can then apply with their approved budget for streetscaping to the region for this funding. So when it's coupled with a capital project, it's cost shared. The funding is at 50%. And if it's not aligned with our capital project, we will fund it at a 33% cost share. So it is very important, and we're actually at a really good spot in that we're really working hard to fast track this master plan so that it does align with the Yonge Street North project. So whether it gets delayed to 2018 or 2019, or if it is on schedule for 2017, we're working really hard to get it in a position where the town will be able to leverage funding, and we can answer back to the public and tell them that this is how we're going to implement Yonge Street North.
So the next steps would be an active community engagement program,
Correct.
public information center, just so and staff will be on hand to explain some of those, or explain those changes and respond to any questions from the community. I think that's really important, that the community has a good understanding of what we're trying to accomplish and the extent of the time for rollouts.
Right.
Additional questions, Regional Councillor?
Just so I understand that, what you just said about funding and direction forward. So just taking Yonge Street North as an example of the other 4 sections, or maybe more than 4, but let's say 4, 3. So the way it would work is the region has a standard streetscape treatment, which is budgeted within a regional budget. Anything that was in this master plan that wanted to be implemented at that time, hence Peter's point, that this council decided wanted to, let's say the full plan is put in front of us, anything, the enhancements, i.e. anything to do with that seems over and above the base standard treatment of a reconstruction project throughout there would then be potentially split 50-50, but not the whole project, is what I'm getting at, right?
Yes, correct. Just the streetscape enhancements.
And there's already some streetscape standards built into a project. This is just over and above that normal standard.
Right.
Right, and that would be the same on all the sections. Okay, so each time a section came up, like Yonge Street North, the project would come forward through the region. We would look at it and then we'd say, okay, the enhancements we're looking at that are over and above what would normally be provided for the region, let's say, is $3.6 million in Yonge Street North. We can proceed if we want at 50-50, or the staff can provide us an option that maybe is 80% of what's in here, and but is that the general process then?
Yes, that's
okay, I think I'm
correct.
getting it. Okay.
And if I can just clarify one more point just on top of that is if, for instance, Yonge Street North is not on our 10-year capital plan for the next 10 years, but there is a desire by the town to enhance it, certainly you can also come forward with an application to us, and we could potentially fund it at 33% since it's not coupled with a capital project.
Gotcha. That's okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other additional questions from members of council? Staff? Great. A lot of work done. Great context and framework for future consideration, and you're absolutely right. It's going to take a very long term to implement, but unless we plan for that now, I think we'll be unhappy with where we end up 25 years from now. So I think it's really important that we have this in place. So thank you very much for the presentation. Can I have a motion to receive the presentation, please? Councillor Bazance, Councillor Twinney. All those in favor? That is carried. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Kerwin. Councillor Broom-Plumley. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you.
Thank you very much.